Chapter 584. Zhang Qingshue's words caused many people present to have other thoughts. As nobles who had lived in Kyoto for generations, nothing in the Izumo city could escape their eyes and ears. Even though they had escaped from the city, they still had sources of information that ordinary people did not know about, such as the military deployment of the Izumo nation and so on. The daimyos from all over the country had now formed an alliance. If they wanted to form an alliance to go to Luo, that was to enter Kyoto and achieve the great cause of rebuilding the shogunate by force, then the information that these small nobles knew would become valuable. It could even be said that they were qualified to be sold at a good price. Everyone, Zhang Qingxue said slowly. He had already seen from the micro-expressions of these people that they definitely knew something. So he probed, I don't know what everyone knows about the situation, but if you're interested, why don't we go together? Very good. Very good. Mr. Lu Gui is right. A number of people, including Mitaru, agreed with Zhang Qingshue's proposal and echoed it. But while they were still thinking about how to use the information in the Izumo city to obtain greater benefits for themselves, these people had actually been targeted by Zhang Qingxue. As they continued to move forward, they suddenly entered a 5-mile miasma. Screams suddenly sounded one after another, and this group of destitute nobles panicked. They wanted to run out of the miasma, but they could not avoid the sneak attack of the green dragon that appeared and disappeared unpredictably. The cunning Zhang Qingxue transformed into a megalosaurus in the miasma. His slender neck, which always confused the enemy and made them underestimate the power contained in his body, was extremely flexible. He could suddenly appear from tricky positions that were beyond their imagination and bite them in half. He was very cunning and bloodthirsty at the same time. Killing was just one of his hobbies and instincts. He was Zhang Qingxue, a vanguard under the great evil dragon god Tiamat. He was best at destroying and subverting others. But this did not mean that he was not fatal. Zhang Qingxue was more dangerous than one could imagine. He did not have to go through so much trouble to deal with more than a dozen nobles. He had to use the heavy fog technique and transform into a dragon to kill them. But he still did it because Zhang Qingxue enjoyed this feeling. He liked to secretly give his opponents a deep sense of despair. In just a few breaths of time, almost all of the nobles were dead. Only a few lucky fellows who had information that he was interested in escaped the disaster for the time being. They were knocked unconscious by the anesthetic gas spat out by the green dragon, and then gathered together by the azure bloodstorm. Finally, they were tied up with ropes made of magic and carried away. Apart from Zhanqing Bloodstorm, the other Megalosaurus warriors also brought various information to Neefmandis. Like a jigsaw puzzle, they integrated all the information about Izumo City and quests into one place. Then, they analyzed it and came up with a terrifying plan. The mortals of this plane live in a harsher environment. Their bodies are relatively stronger, and they are more resistant to poison and plagues. That's why the plan of using the origin of plagues to create chaos isn't feasible. In addition, because Rising Cloud City originally had a large number of wooden buildings, setting fire to the city was actually one of the better ways to create chaos. But not long ago, the city suffered a fire, and the fire prevention facilities were increased a lot. Tell me the result. Listening to Zhanqing Bloodstorm's speech, Neefmandis quickly lost interest. He interrupted the green dragon. Tell me what method you came up with to lure that keys to appear in this city alone. As long as he's willing to appear, everything else is easy. With our strength, we'll definitely be able to subdue that young blue dragon who dares to disobey the will of the Dragon Queen. The ancient brown dragon's words made Zhanqing Bloodstorm unhappy, but due to the other party's strength, as well as the orders given by the Dragon Queen and the Evil Dragon Council, he had no choice but to obey. The other Megalosaurus warriors were all watching from the side. They had long disliked Zhanqing Bloodstorm's insidious cunning and Neefmandis' arrogance. At this time, the Githyanki ship had already entered the predetermined position, and their technicians were adjusting the song burner. Neefmandis brought the Megalosaurus warriors to Mount Futu near Rising Cloud City. They gathered there and waited for the Githyankis to be ready. At that time, they would all take action against Keys. Even if they could not kill him, they felt that they could at least delay the mutated dragon for a while, and the Githyanki's weapon would be able to finish off the target. As for why they wanted to let Rising Cloud City fall into chaos, it was completely based on their own situation. As a megalosaurus, most of them would have the experience of having a vassal army, and the life and death of those vassal armies were not very important to them. Unless there was a huge chaos that might affect the interests of the megalosaurus, they would rarely come out to solve problems. This was because staying in one place for a long time was not conducive to maintaining reverence, and the megalosaurus needed their vassals to maintain fear of them. We can support a daimyo and let him come to Rising Cloud City to carry out the Shang Luo ceremony according to Wusan tradition. Zhanqing Bloodstorm narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at the ancient brown dragon who had transformed into a half-giant in front of him. As long as that guy wants to rule this area, in order to stabilize the foundation of his rule, he will definitely not destroy the Shang Luo ceremony. Instead, he will participate in it and face the challenge of that daimyo. When the time comes, we'll catch him off guard and definitely hold him back. Zhanqing blew his bloody nose and spat out a large amount of sour gas. He said to Nefermandus, "There's only one thing we need to prepare in advance, and that is to let that Japanese great name successfully reach Chuyin City." For his idea, Nefermandus of the ancient brown dragon did not express his approval or disapproval in person. The last emperor of the ancient empire still retained his former habit of governing his subordinates. He would not easily reveal his true intentions in front of his subordinates, but he had actually agreed with Zhanqing Bloodstorm's suggestion in his heart. P.S. The following will not be counted in the word count. I have established a Scales of Eternal Order discussion group 618382262. Everyone is welcome to come in and discuss. At present, there is an outline of the form of the comic part, an introduction of the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes highlights of the creation, please join. Chapter 585. After being stationed in the Izumo city for a few days, Keys sent people to collect wealth from the Japanese nobles. Then, through the scale of perpetual order, he converted the wealth into various resources for the future conquest of the god of virtual games, STEM. But this didn't mean that he had relaxed his vigilance against the Pinochet Dragon Queen's attack at any time. Therefore, when the Githyanki's Snakehead Special Destroyer used the psionic power amplifier to search for him, Keys immediately felt that he was being spied on. "It seems that we have guests." Keys stood on the top of the Zhaixing building in the general's mansion and looked up at the sky. "And they are all uninvited guests." When the Githyankis were busy assembling and debugging the burying songster, they didn't know that more than one pair of eyes on the ground were staring at them. The intention behind each and every move was analyzed, and the corresponding countermeasures were prepared. In addition, there was also a group of people in the Izumo city, the street gangsters known as Curiosities, who were also busy. Now, they were all under the jurisdiction of the city's Public Security Administration. Under the command of the Desert Elf Brock, they detected all the changes in the Japanese capital for Keys. At this moment, the leader of many Curiosities and the leader of several street organizations, a guy named Keiji Asada, was respectfully kneeling in front of Brock, listening to the instructions of the Desert Elf with a posture of prostration, not daring to violate the rules at all. Although Brock could communicate with others in any language thanks to the glib tongue added by the half-lich Snade, he still couldn't master the many grammatical rules in the dialect, and his pronunciation was also very different from the real people of the Izumo nation. Normally, when encountering such a foreigner, any Curiosities would ridicule him or even tease him and regard him as a target to be blackmailed. But in front of Brock, Keiji Asada was very respectful. Keiji Asada was actually the illegitimate son of a great Japanese aristocrat. As a big shot among the eccentrics, he was actually a big shot. He had knowledge and vision that ordinary people did not have, and he was no stranger to intelligent creatures like the desert elves. He knew that they were a nomadic race that lived in the wilderness of the Ash World. Compared to the Wozang Empire, The nomadic tribe was worlds apart. However, such a desert elf could command a group of demons. In the eyes of the Japanese, the mercenaries under Key's command were like the 8 million demons in the fairy tales. They were monsters with green faces and fangs, rock-like muscles, and many arms. They all obeyed Brock's command and were obviously in awe of him. This situation also made Keiji Asada fearful. He knew very well that Desert Elf Brock could subdue so many demons. Not only was he powerful, but he should also have strong support. If he guessed right, the Lord Keys, mentioned by all the demons, including the Desert Elves, was probably the real culprit that destroyed the Wozang Empire. However, in order to become a leader, Keiji Asada had always followed a principle: to stand on the side of the strong. So he had no psychological burden at all. In order to get a new powerful backer, he quickly chose Brock to offer his cheap loyalty. And Brock also needed such a guy who was familiar with the Chuyun city to provide him with information. The two hit it off. Of course, there was still a distinction between the superior and the inferior. Mr. Asada, the desert elves were taller than the human beings in the Ash world. Brock stood and spoke at this time, and Keiji Asada, who was lying on the ground, was not even as high as his knees. According to the request of Lord Keys, your Nulian group should change your target recently. You don't need to investigate those escapees anymore. Instead, you need to keep an eye on any strange faces entering the Chuyun city. Your Excellency, please tell me to what extent should we do? Asada raised his head and stretched out his palm to make a stroke near his neck. Should we kill those people directly, or... You don't need to kill everyone, Brock directly ordered. There's a so-called daimyo doesn't know what's good for him. He wants to challenge Lord Keys according to the traditional Wozang ceremony of Shangluo. I'll distribute the portrait of that guy to you later. Considering that he may use makeup, you have to send some spies who are good at recognizing people to find him. Your Excellency, Keiji Asada knocked his head on the ground. This task is given by you and Lord Keys' trust in our Nulian group. We must show the efficiency of the organization and our loyalty to the people who will go through fire and water for it. If the task fails, I will personally lead all the men who participated in the action to cut their bellies to apologize. Death is not a relief. Brock interrupted him and said in an affirmative tone, the orders issued by Lord Keys have been repeatedly weighed and will not exceed your ability. If you can't complete it, it's entirely because you didn't do your best. For those who dare to disobey his will, even if they commit suicide, they can't escape the tragic experience they will experience after death. The Desert Elf's cold words made Keiji Asada break out in a cold sweat. A large group of sweat stains appeared on the back of the knitted hunting clothes he wore. However, Brock did not forget to give him a red date after giving him a whip. In order to help you better complete the task, this red spear is a treasure given to you by Lord Keys. As long as 3 obsidian magic beads are inlaid in the groove of its handle every 10 days, it can maintain the enchantment effect of inflicting fire damage to the enemy. As the user, you will not be protected by the red spear and will not be afraid of ordinary flames. While talking, Brock reached out and snapped his fingers. Immediately, a Goliath warrior came over with a long spear. The shaft of the spear was painted vermilion, so it was named Red Spear. On the other hand, its sharp blade was like a Japanese sword. There were 2 blood grooves between the 2 sections of the blade, and it also had the ability to stab while slashing. In addition to this enchanted weapon, Keiji Asada also got a portrait of the daimyo who tried to come to Chuyun City to hold the ceremony of Shangluo. Looking at the daimyo's name written in the corner of the portrait in white, Keiji Asada. Chapter 586. If the son kills his father, there will be a catastrophe within 3 generations. Mogami Hikari, who was sitting in the 2-wheeled carriage, sneered disdainfully. If I don't take a step forward, then I'm afraid I'll have to travel in the blackboard waste cage now. It can be seen that if I want to live a more comfortable life, I must always move forward. At that time, there was a huge turmoil in the Neon Empire. Since Chuyun City was taken over by Keys, the rulers who were originally at the top of the chain of order were swept away, and the daimyos and generals were more or less affected. Mogami Hikari took advantage of this to drive his father out, and he ascended to the throne of the 13th generation of the Mogami family. Now, he had established a cooperative relationship with Zhanqing Shuabao. In order to achieve a greater goal, he had to make another simple and difficult gamble. If he won, he would lead the Mogami family to the most glorious path. If he failed, then the family would no longer have the possibility of surviving. However, he firmly believed that he could win the gamble like before. In order to hold the Shang Luo ceremony, he had to rush to Chuyun City and ring the bell on the drum tower in the city. When the Neon Empire's royal family was still alive, the daimyos and generals in the various towns would usually gather an army and go to Kyoto to show their strength. If they succeeded, they would automatically gain the support of the Neon Empire's nobles and become the highest military commander in name, also known as the general. But if they failed because of the army, although they wouldn't die, they would inevitably be ridiculed by the Neon Empire's nobles, and the prestige of their family would never recover. But this time, Mogami Hikari didn't bring many soldiers, and even the slave warriors didn't bring many people. In addition to Zhanqing Shuabao, who was disguised as Mr. Midori, he only asked a dozen family ninjas to disguise themselves as ordinary laborers to follow him to Chuyun City. The reason why he did this was to avoid Kiza's eyes and ears. Although there were currently a large number of escapees in Chuyun City, because of the intervention of the scale of perpetual order, the city's commercial atmosphere became stronger. The merchant families from all over the country, even the merchants from the small countries adjacent to Japan, were like sharks that had smelled the scent of blood. They followed the scent of wealth and started to gather in this city. They had brought a huge amount of resources here, all kinds of metal products, unprocessed steel embryos, and enough food to feed the otherworldly soldiers. Keys, on the other hand, opened up the treasury of the Wusong Empire and the treasuries of the great nobles and used the stored currency to pay for the payment. This generous new master of the Yun nation had no intention of defaulting on his debt. Therefore, more and more merchants rushed to Cloud City. Now, Mogami Mitsuyoshi was disguised as a small merchant from a remote area of Japan. He used a two-wheeled cart to pull a large number of silk goods to the city, as if he wanted to take a share of the wealth. As they moved forward, when they were less than 5 to 6 parasangs away from Chuyun City, they had already stepped onto a concrete road paved with shell ash and mortar. This was the official road of the Wusong Empire, and there were checkpoints set up at regular intervals. Mogami Mitsuyoshi and his group relied on the genuine silk goods, the vouchers they had obtained from trading with the scale of perpetual order in the past, and the small pieces of judgment money to pave the way. They did not encounter too many difficulties and quickly passed through the checkpoints and arrived at the gate of the Yun Nation. However, when they stepped into the gate of the Yun Nation, their whereabouts were detected by the spies of the Nuliang group. With a complex communication network composed of gestures, eyes, and code words, it did not take long for the situation of these people to be placed on Keiji Asada's desk. Then, they were immediately reported to Desert Elf Barak, who had been paying attention to the development of the situation. Even though Mogami Mitsuyoshi had put on makeup in advance, he still could not hide from the eyes of the professionals in the Nuliang group. Boss, they seem to be looking for a stall near the business town, but in fact they're circling around to the bell and drum tower. A leader of the hitmen, who was standing in front of Keiji Asada's carriage, bowed and reported, "I have arranged it. As long as they walk to the next intersection, they will encounter the men of sacrifice who are looking for trouble. They will burn all their goods and force those people to take action in advance." Just as the leader of the hitmen reported, when Mogami Mitsuyoshi and his group walked around the business town to the next intersection, a group of hitmen suddenly came up to them. They were dressed in strange clothes, bearing their chests and bellies. Their bellies were round, and they were holding wine jars in their hands. They were playing around and drinking on the street. The pedestrians who came and went were all afraid of them, for fear of getting into trouble. Originally, Mogami Mitsuyoshi, who was famous, did not take this group of debauches seriously at all. His family ninjas disguised as laborers could easily knock them all to the ground. However, in order to not expose his whereabouts. He ordered his men to turn the rickshaw around and stick it to the side of the street in order to avoid this group of drunken hitmen. However, something unexpected happened. When they crossed paths with the caravan of the Mogami family, the group of mystic cultivators who had been living peacefully actually threw the wine jars in their hands at the goods on the rickshaws. Then, they immediately took out fire starter items from the pouches at their waists and threw them at the caravan. The high-concentration alcohol met the open fire and burned in an instant. The men of sacrifice raised by Nurio group changed their drunken state and pulled out their swords to rush to the family ninjas who were protecting Mogami Mitsuyoshi's carriage. Although the other party's combat ability was far superior to this group of men of sacrifice, many of them were still caught off guard and fell to the ground after being stabbed several times. We have been discovered. Ignore these people and rush to the bell and drum tower to ring the bell. Zhanqing Shuabao, who was disguised as Mr. Green Noble, roared and raised his hand to kill a man of sacrifice who rushed to him. Then he pulled away the ninja who was pulling the rickshaw from Mogami Mitsuyoshi and was ready to personally protect the daimyo to the bell and drum tower. At this time, the roofs of the houses on the street were full of archers of Nurio group. They held the Japanese standard longbows and kept shooting arrows at Mogami Mitsuyoshi's group, ignoring the men of sacrifice who were fighting with the family ninjas. Zhanqing Shuabao rushed forward dozens of steps. The specially modified rickshaw behind him, which was lined with steel plates, was full of arrows. Just as he was about to rush out of the encirclement, a group of people suddenly came out from the side. The leader was Keiji Asada, the leader of Nurio Group. This leader of the hitmen was now wearing a scarlet Hazara-style outfit and riding his beloved BMW Songphone. He quickly rushed to the side of Mogami Mitsuyoshi's carriage. He held a red spear in his hand and suddenly stabbed Mogami Mitsuyoshi's carriage. The flame was even one step ahead of the red spear and hit the crossbar of the carriage first. Chapter 587. I'm the first-generation leader of the new group, and I'll kill you here, Keiji Asada declared loudly. Even though his red spear didn't pierce Mogami Hikari's body, but just tore apart the modified two-wheeled rickshaw, it was blown away by the strong wind created by Zhan Qingshua's wave of his hand. But it didn't matter. As the leader of the kindred, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Act like a capable actor, attract everyone's attention, and severely humiliate the daimyo who tried to challenge his new master's prestige. As far as the current situation was concerned, he had done that. However, because of the influence of the red spear in his hand, Brock seemed to forget to tell him that this enchanted weapon made by the half-lich Snade had some other effects besides the protection against fire and fire damage. He became very excited after entering the battle state. Originally, it was just a show to humiliate Mogami Hikari, but it was far from satisfying his desire to perform at the moment. Jumping down from Song Feng's body, Keiji Asada turned the red spear over his head, and flames covered the body of the spear. Under the stimulation of the obsidian magic bead, the nerves of the Baylor in the core of the spear began to be agitated, and the abyss flame spewed out from the spearhead, seemingly endless. He stepped on the ground fiercely, clenched the red spear with both hands, and stabbed forward with all his strength. He lowered his waist, leaned forward, and gathered all his strength on the spear shaft. With a good-shaped design, the weapon didn't make any sound when piercing the air. The flame on the spearhead was like the breath of an angry dragon, directly attacking the two-wheeled rickshaw whose metal baffle had just been torn apart. Bastard! Seeing this, Zhan Qingxue had no time to defend and attack. He had to raise the two-wheeled rickshaw high with his arms, so that Mogami Hikari inside could avoid the flame. Then he had time to throw the rickshaw aside and jump to Keiji Asada. Just in time, Keiji Asada blocked the spear in front of him and used all kinds of skills such as rolling down, chopping down, hitting down, rubbing in, and knocking down to set up a dense defensive posture in front of him. Due to the limitation of power brought by the transformation, Zhanqing Blood Rage didn't study top martial arts like Nine Sword Catalog as hard as Quest did. Facing Asada Keiji's spear skill, it was a little difficult for him to parry. Not long after, The hunting clothes he was wearing were torn into strips, and there were also large traces of being burned by the abyssal flames. Kiyoshi Mogami, who had just climbed out of a bumpy modified rickshaw, felt a metallic taste on his tongue. He knew that this was the taste of fear. For the glory of the Mogami family, for a more suitable position, I must. Throwing the clogs on his feet aside, Mogami Kuchi struggled to run in the direction of the drum tower. He also had 5 magatama on him, all of which were inlaid with obsidian magic beads. After they were activated, they could provide him with some support and protection when it came to magic. Now he had activated a magatama with the function of instant escape, which improved his escape speed a lot. That idiot daimyo is going to run away. Leaning slightly, Keiji Asada caught a glimpse of Mogami Kuchi's back. The big shot sneered at Zhanqing blood rage in front of him. You don't think that he, a descendant of the Guardian family, can be unimpeded in Chuyin City, do you? Ha ha ha. The so-called Guardian Daimyo referred to the officials who replaced the Guardian appointed by the Emperor of the Neon Empire and managed the military and political affairs in various places. They were not nobles in the traditional sense, but just rich families in various places. Even after the Senate replaced the Emperor, the Guardians in various places became daimyo and generals one after another. However, due to their relatively low birth, the daimyo and generals of the Guardian Daimyo were still not particularly respected by some civilians in Chuyin City, which is a capital full of nobles. Like Keiji Asada, the descendant of a real noble family, even if he was just an illegitimate child, he still had the right to laugh at Mogami Kuchi's birth. Others would feel that it was very reasonable and would not think that there was anything disrespectful in his idea. And Zhanqing Blood Rage did not take his words seriously. In fact, the Guardian Daimyo had nothing to do with him. He simply thought that Mogami Kuchi's current behavior was stupid. Without his protection, it would be inconceivable for a mere mortal to reach the bell and drum tower. After all, there was a troop under the command of the mutated dragon that had participated in the bloody battle. Stupid Neon. Zhanqing Blood Rage scolded secretly. He was considering whether to transform into a dragon and quickly kill the opponent in front of him. However, if he chose to do so, the mutated dragon was likely to appear in advance and vent all its anger on him. To be honest, Zhanqing Blood Rage was not conceited enough to think that he could fight with keys alone. I have to let those fighters in advance. I can't face the mutated dragon alone. He quickly made a decision. He stretched his neck and let out a low roar that did not match his figure. Now I can only help Mogami Kuchi again. If he succeeds, we can still proceed according to the original plan. If not, we have to let Neferman bear the consequences of failure. The cunning Zhanqing Blood Rage figured out the best situation for himself. Then he immediately gave up the confrontation with Keiji Asada and quickly retreated to Mogami Kuchi. As he flew and bounced, his palms constantly formed various magic marks in front of his chest, and he began to chant the spells needed before casting the spell. Group Spell Attack, Melf's Acid Arrow. According to the bonus of the casting level, after using the Group Spell Attack skill, the number of acid arrows shot from Zhanqing Blood Rage's palms instantly increased from 1 to dozens. The target he chose was not Keiji Asada, who he had fought with before, but the archers standing on the roof of the house on the street who were pouring arrows at him and Mogami Kuchi. Even if he did not have time to aim, Melf's acid arrows were not all concentrated on the target. A dozen of them actually hit the roof under the archer's hands and feet. However, under the corrosion of the strong acid, those roofs quickly became loose and carbonized. They could not bear the weight of the archers and collapsed one after another. As for the archers who were directly hit by the acid arrows, they were more unlucky. They didn't even have time to cry out before they turned into puddles of pus. For a moment, the rain of arrows all over the sky disappeared. Zhanqing Blood Rage saved the obsidian magic beads needed for Mogami Kuchi to use the protective arrow Magatama again. The daimyo immediately embedded all the obsidian magic beads on the Magatama that increased his speed. Chapter 588. In essence, the Kinkers were just a group of street gangsters. They were not real desperados. In the face of the terrible magic, the Kinkers of the Nyori group inevitably flinched and stopped their steps at the same time. In fact, it was within Quest's expectations that they would drop the ball. The reason why the young blue dragon arranged the Kinkers to encircle and suppress Goto Mitsuyoshi was to humiliate him and make him unable to continue the ceremony of Shangluo. However, Goto Mitsuyoshi didn't understand the mystery and still ran to the bell and drum tower. But he didn't know that even if he could ring the bell, the ceremony of Shangluo, which showed the power of the daimyo, would lose its legitimacy because of his previous humiliation. This was also the reason why he didn't get the position. Goto Mitsuyoshi didn't learn from the previous supervisor, his father, that the essence of the ceremony of Shangluo was actually a powerful magic contract. Strict conditions must be followed to get the approval of all the Japanese families who signed the contract. Otherwise, how could a ceremony easily determine the legitimacy of a leader of the Japanese armed forces? In other words, Keiji Asada had led the Kinkers to complete their mission. Keys had already arranged Brock to make preparations in advance for the work to be finished. He selected more suitable people to participate in the execution. Just as Zantii Bloodstorm protected Goto Mitsuyoshi from behind and ran to the bell and drum tower, the walls of the houses on both sides of the street were suddenly broken by a group of tall creatures. The walls made of planks or bricks were no different from paper in front of the Goliath warriors. They wielded heavy weapons such as giant hammers, axes, and broadswords. They jumped out of the broken holes and stood in front of Zantii Bloodstorm and Goto Mitsuyoshi. These stone people were much taller and stronger than humans, and each of them looked like a slightly smaller giant. When more than 30 Goliaths launched a collective charge, the earth began to shake. Their thick feet made a rumbling sound as they stepped on the ground. Zantii Bloodstorm, who turned into Mr. Green Noble, narrowed his eyes. In the face of so many Goliaths, even if he was an extremely old and powerful green dragon, it was still unknown whether he could deal with them in his human form. It had to be known that Goliath's tough skin was almost immune to some low-level spells. In his human form, the power of deep blue blood explosions magic was greatly reduced. If you were to fight Goliath head-on, he might not be their match. Megalosaurus were all prideful creatures. If a warrior under the command of the legendary Megalosaurus, Tiamat, was beaten to the ground by a group of Goliaths, then there was no need for him to continue living. Therefore, he could no longer suppress his urge to transform. He immediately mobilized the hidden power in his body and attempted to transform back into the true form of a legendary green dragon. However, he was still a step too late. "I'm very regretful. And you, even more so." A low whisper suddenly sounded from behind him. Deep blue blood explosion only felt a chill on his neck. The surging power in his body was stifled, and the casting of his transformation was abruptly interrupted. A shadow stealer, who was slightly taller than the halfling, suddenly jumped out from his shadow. The syringe in his hand was now inserted into deep blue blood explosion's neck. The herbs and venom provided by the half-goat Pau, the seaweed on the horse-shaped water monster, the venom of the demon-hunting spider, and the craftsmanship of the ogre which Dr. Paro had concocted a very powerful paralyzing potion. A syringe full of this concentrated potion was completely injected into the human form of deep blue blood explosion by the Shadow Stealer assassin. This cunning Megalosaurus felt dizzy for the first time. After succeeding, the Shadow Stealer assassin immediately fled far away, leaving behind a dumbfounded Motoi Hikari standing beside deep blue blood explosion. The giant Goliath, who was at the forefront, did not hesitate to raise his giant hammer, ready to smash the two targets wanted by Keys into small pancakes. Using the last of his strength, deep blue blood explosion used his palm to brush the head of the giant hammer. With the help of this force, he leaped into the air. After smashing through two houses along the street, he landed heavily on the ground full of rubble and rubble. He struggled to get up, but in the end, he spat out a mouthful of blood in vain. Then, he clutched his neck and lay on the ground. His face turned pale. Even though he had not yet transformed into his green dragon form, Deep blue blood explosion's cheeks had turned emerald green. As for Motoi Hikari, when he saw this situation, he was so scared that he almost wet his pants. The Goliath warriors, who looked like demons in fairy tales, simply reached out their hands and crushed the jade talisman hanging on his chest. Motoi Hikari lost his last bit of support. After taking care of the daimyo, who had attempted to provoke Sir Keys, the Goliath warriors immediately changed their target and surrounded Deep Blue Blood Explosion, who had already begun to fall into a state of paralysis. They all held their weapons, as if they wanted to give this humanoid Megalosaurus warrior a final blow and take him down in one wave. But before they could succeed, a violent storm suddenly began to spin rapidly with Deep Blue Blood Explosion as the center. Many of the Goliath warriors who rushed too fast were hit by the wind and staggered. When they came to a stop, they discovered that there were a few more figures beside Zhan Qingxue, who was lying on the ground. One of them was a half-giant with brown hair. Nephrman Dis, Deep Blue Blood Explosion, who was in a state of paralysis, said weakly, "Help me remove this negative state." Hearing the begging words, the immemorial brown dragon snorted in disdain, but he still waved his hand and cast greater poison removal. A light purple halo wrapped around Deep Blue Blood Explosion's body, and soon the green dragon regained consciousness. "It seems that your plan is useless," Nephremendis said in a slightly mocking tone without looking at Deep Blue Blood Explosion, who was struggling to get up. He showed his arrogance. The best way to deal with a Megalosaurus is to fight. After the ancient brown dragon said this, his body immediately began to expand. Soon after, a brown dragon with ancient knowledge, boundless violence, and a huge, meandering body appeared in the business district of the rising Cloud City. Although the long years had weakened him, making his torso and limbs thin, and his eyes were also troubled by squinting for a long time, he was still the most powerful brown dragon in the multiverse. At all times, his body exuded the smell of dry sand and slow death. Chapter 589. Unlike most Megalosaurus, the brown dragons did not have wings. Instead, they had two parallel rows of fin-like protrusions on their backs. However, there was no doubt that they were also a type of Megalosaurus. They had extremely high intelligence and could use spitting weapons as well as various spell-like abilities unique to Megalosaurus. Once upon a time, in a relatively central plane of the multiverse, long before the emergence of human civilization, even before the establishment of the Tiefling Empire Bar Tulasi or the Dragon Kingdom Akosia, the ancient Megalosaurus Kingdom Merijet had existed for a long time. In Merijet, ordinary humanoid creatures were the humble servants of the last descendants of the evil dragons. The last descendants of the evil dragons were the servants of the colorful dragons, and the Megalosaurus were the servants of the great monarch. These pure-blooded brown dragons had ruled for nearly 1,000 centuries as the pharaoh and the bishop of Tiamat. As the last Merijet and the last pharaoh, Neferman Dis' arrogance had reached an unshakable level. There were never words such as compromise and negotiation in his dictionary, so when a growing clan of dragons of calamity appeared near his empire, Neferman Dis did not hesitate to choose to go to war. Unfortunately, in the end, both sides suffered great losses. The declining empire was eventually fragmented, and most of its territory and resources were inherited by the Dragon Kingdom Akosia. If Tiamat had not remembered the brown dragon's worship to him for nearly 10,000 years, Neferman Dis would have been completely buried in the ruins and broken walls along with the dismembered empire. At most, there would only be a little trace left in the pile of old papers. Because he was a king of a fallen country, Neferman Dis hated to see those prosperous countries. When he arrived at Izumo City, the last Megalosaurus pharaoh was filled with anger. He wanted to destroy everything here. He wanted to bury the city in the dust. He wanted to take revenge without any reason. The might of the Dragon King. From his nostrils that were hidden behind the spikes on his face, a scorching stream of air gushed out. His body swayed slightly, and an astonishing might radiated out from Firmin Dis in all directions. This kind of power was different from ordinary draconic aura. It was more like a kind of domain bonus effect. All friendly units would benefit from it, while enemies would feel an indescribable pressure. Only the leader of the dragon group could display the might of the Dragon Lord. Neferman Dis emitted this kind of aura in Key's territory. It was no different from showing off to the young blue dragon. He wanted to use this method of provocation to provoke Kith into fighting with him. As expected, not long after he used the might of the dragon god, a sonorous and powerful dragon roar came from the center of Izumo City. Sand Waterfall Burial. As if to further enrage Keys, Neferman Dis also let out a loud roar. Following his roar, the surrounding houses and stone slabs all shattered. Sand and gravel surged up from the ground and pushed in all directions with him as the center. The Goliath warriors who were still struggling to hold on immediately turned around and fled when they saw this. If someone was too slow, the quicksand would grab onto their ankles and drag them into the sand vortex, causing them to meet a tragic death. With just a casual move, Neferman Dis destroyed the business district of Izumo City, including the scale of perpetual order. Many merchants who came to Japan to do business hurriedly evacuated. They didn't even have time to take their goods and money and could only be swallowed by the yellow sand. For a time, many airships forcibly broke free from the restraints of their moorings and hurriedly rose into the sky to avoid the disaster. Seeing that the desert was still expanding, the Demolic Snade had a solution. He used the technology he learned from the Camel Emperor of the island world to temporarily create several totem poles. After inserting the totem poles into the land in the direction of the desert's expansion, he continued to absorb the magic power of this sand waterfall burial and finally stopped the desert's expansion in time, temporarily protecting Izumo City. But even so, the entire business district still turned into a desert. Houses, money, merchants who didn't have time to escape, and many livestock were buried in the desert. The first two could be cleaned up after the event, but the latter two had no chance of survival. Seeing the scene of destruction that he had caused, Neferman Dis couldn't help but let out a short roar. This was the unique laughter of the Megalosaurus. Behind him, including Azure Bloodstorm, who had just recovered, the other Megalosaurus warriors all revealed their true figures. The legendary pentacolored Megalosaurus, who were at least at the age of an extremely old dragon, stood in the desert created by magic. The sand under the legendary red dragon melted, and a small magma lake appeared. Beside the legendary green dragon, all kinds of desert plants began to grow. The sand under the legendary black dragon became moist, and even sporadically rotten swamps appeared. The legendary white dragon constantly breathed out frost breath to make itself more comfortable in the desert environment. Among this batch of Megalosaurus warriors, there was no blue dragon. In fact, in the many failures of encirclement and annihilation of the mutated dragons, Tiamat had learned a lesson. Never send a pentacolored dragon of the same species to annihilate a mutated dragon of the same color. Otherwise, after the failure, the pentacolored dragons who were the same color as the mutated dragons might even worship the strong of the same species. The pentacolored dragon queen couldn't accept this situation at all. After completing the 2 steps of provocation and destruction, Neferman Dis's bellicose mood completely rose. He didn't want to wait for Keys to come. If you don't come, then I'll go. The ancient brown dragon shook his neck and jumped high as if he was diving from a high platform. Then he plunged into the desert ground under his feet and quickly drilled into the ground under the desert. The strong ones go first. Zankinks raised his head and looked around. He slowly said, "I'm not strong enough to be the first batch to fight." Hearing his words, the other pentacolored Megalosaurus warriors showed a ferocious smile. They didn't move at all. Obviously, they also wanted to let the arrogant ancient brown dragon test Keys' strength first. However, they didn't have to wait for long. Neferman Dis's figure returned from the hole he drilled into. A wide mouth bit on the neck of the ancient brown dragon and dragged it out of the hole. Then, he threw it to the side of the smug Megalosaurus warriors. Neferman Dis didn't die. He only suffered some injuries. Therefore, after he escaped from the clamp, he quickly used spells and his own self-healing ability to heal his wounds. It was just that he was a little older after all. The scales that fell off could not be repaired, so the ugly teeth marks were still visible on his slender neck. Chapter 590. Withering Breath. Feeling humiliated, Nefermindis couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then used his breath attack on Keys, who was poking his body out of the desert soil. Black flames came out of the ancient brown dragon's mouth and hit the young blue dragon's huge head. Unlike the five-colored megalosaurus, the brown dragon's breath was a compound attack. It included both high-temperature flames and the dark corrosion that could dehydrate the opponent. The so-called dry your face was definitely not a joke when it came to the brown dragon's breath. After being spat out, even though Quest was not afraid of fire damage, the dark corrosion with surging negative energy still caused the scales on his face to wither and fall off. Coupled with the impact, the young blue dragon's head also tilted back a little. Now, it was Zhanqing Bloodstorm who spoke. This legendary green dragon was worthy of his cunning and resourceful reputation. Although he didn't want to be the first bird before, he seized the opportunity and decisively took the lead to attack. At the same time, he didn't forget to pull in the other megalosaurus fighters. Zhanqing Bloodstorm's neck swung, and his slender head suddenly poked out. He didn't have a bulge or horn on his head, but a snake or catfish. Tentacles hung down from his mouth and chin like a beard. These were sensitive sensory organs used to detect enemies and food. His eyes were originally black, but now they were emitting an evil light red glow because of excitement. Without a doubt, he was a huge and strong megalosaurus. Although his limbs were slender, his strength was not weak at all. His neck was thin and long, making him look more like a mirage dragon than a standard green dragon. Zhanqing Bloodstorm's appearance might make the observer think that he was sick or in a weak state, a mistake that anyone would only make once. But this was not the case. Instead of using his breath attack, the cunning and petty Zhanqing Bloodstorm chose another method of attack. His long and narrow face that resembled a venomous snake's opened wide as he forcefully sank his venomous fangs into Keys' shoulder. He had just fallen into a state of paralysis because of the poison, and now he wanted to take revenge on the young blue dragon. The muscles that were infected by the venom quickly turned ashen white, and the stinking pus slowly seeped out from the holes left by the venom. After the successful attack, Zhan Qingshue's head suddenly retracted. However, he was still one step too late. Thick electric arcs suddenly spurted out from Keys' mouth and stuck to his snake-shaped head, sending the legendary green dragon flying far away. The young blue dragon, who did not have the habit of being beaten, quickly climbed out of the cave. He spread his wings and rushed towards the group of megalosaurus warriors in an unparalleled manner. In terms of size, those megalosaurus that were at least at the age of an extremely old dragon were more like children in front of a young megalosaurus. In terms of close combat ability, they were really no match for Keys. Of course, facing so many legendary megalosaurus at the same time, Keys was actually under a lot of pressure. After he broke through a sand barrier and once again overturned the leading Nefermindis, a fat ancient black dragon suddenly bit the young blue dragon's tail. This cumbersome beast was different from any other black dragon that adventurers or megalosaurus scholars knew of. He was not as winding and slender as others of his kind, and his body was short. He was a large and fat creature. His leathery flesh protruded and dotted between the scales that could never fully cover his fat body. His tail, neck, and under his pig-like, disdainful eyes were all swollen and swollen. Every time he moved a little, he would struggle to breathe for a moment. His hind legs were almost bent under the weight of his heavy body. Every time he breathed, he would make a sound that was magnified countless times. But his weight was indeed heavy enough. Even with Keys' strength, he could not rely on himself to throw this black dragon that was as fat as a pig to the side. And because his bite was too close to the tip of his tail, Keys could not turn his body and use his powerful front claws to tear this ugly guy into pieces. In this way, the The young blue dragon's body was almost controlled in place. Sand solidified. Nefermindis, who got up from the ground again, cast a spell at the fat black dragon. A large amount of sand flew out from the soil and directly solidified on the black dragon that was under the spell, as if it was wearing a heavy coat. The extra weight was too much for the black dragon to bear. The joints of his two hind legs made a teeth-numbing sound of tendons breaking. "If you dare to open your mouth, I will kill you without waiting for an audience with Lord Tiamat." Nefermindis threatened loudly. He did not care at all about the pain the black dragon was enduring and what it felt in its heart. For this ancient brown dragon, the most important thing now was to complete the mission given by the Penishade Dragon Queen and to eliminate this mutated dragon monster that had repeatedly embarrassed it. Coincidentally, the two were highly overlapping, so Nefermindis fought very hard. Not only did he urge the other Megalosaurus warriors to harass Keys, but he also relied on his body size that was not too different from the young blue dragon to personally fight many times with the young blue dragon. This chaotic battle between the Megalosaurus completely flattened the business district that was almost completely buried under the yellow sand. The otherworldly soldiers under Kitha's command were of no help at all in the fight against this group of colossal creatures. Not long after, the blazing dragon blood spilled all over the place covered in yellow sand. Not only was there the blood of the Megalosaurus warriors, but Keys also suffered a lot of injuries. The fat black dragon that was holding Keys' tail had completely turned into a huge round stone ball under the continuous enhancement of the sand solidification spell, dragging the young blue dragon tail. Many of the Megalosaurus warriors were also in a state of exhaustion at this time, and the number of times Keys used his spit to attack gradually decreased. Suddenly, the sky dimmed for a moment, and the eternal blaze hanging high in the sky seemed to be extinguished for a moment. Then, a thick beam of light fell from the sky, accurately hitting Keys' head and piercing through it. Then, like a hot knife cutting through butter, this beam of light cut through Keys' head all the way to the tip of his tail. Green smoke rose from the huge dragon corpse. Perhaps because it was evaporated by the high temperature, not much blood seeped out from the two halves of the dragon corpse. Nefermindis stood up, pushed aside the huge stone ball in front of him, and walked to Keys' side. Betraying the glory of the Dragon Queen, his words came to an abrupt end because he did not see any burnt internal organs in the dragon corpse, only a large number of mechanical gears and other structures scattered in it. As for the layer of biological skin that imitated the young blue dragon's appearance, it had already fallen off. Chapter 591. Keys? Of course not. It was just a clockwork megalosaurus covered with leviathan skin tissue that was cut in half by the songburner of the burial. And after suffering such a heavy blow, it was only the layer of leviathan skin that was really dead. As long as the clockwork megalosaurus was repaired, it could still be alive and kicking. But after using this songburner of the burial, the Red Dragon class mothership was still in a standby state and was unable to deal with the terrible monster that suddenly appeared in front of it. Keys had transformed into his true form and stepped on the head of the Githyanki mothership. The young blue dragon, who was many times larger than the appearance of the clockwork megalosaurus, landed on the Red Dragon mothership. The huge load directly caused the engine of the spaceship to shut down, and the thrusters were overloaded one after another, so it had to be forced to land on the ground. The Snakehead class destroyers wandered around the mothership and constantly harassed it, but they could not break through the most basic scale defense of the giant monster. Quest raised his thick neck and let out a thunderous roar. A force field barrier invisible to the naked eye quickly spread out in all directions with him as the center. As long as it came into contact with the destroyers, it would tear them apart. After discovering the situation of the planar landing fleet, the personnel on the special spaceships that were still on standby in the near-Earth orbit immediately activated their psionic power amplifiers and bombarded Keth with psionic power in an attempt to make him give up on destroying the mothership. But when the psionic warlocks just touched the amplifier, the instrument overloaded, and they lost all their minds in an instant. The spaceships lost control, and could only continue to operate in the low Earth orbit with the traction of the plane. If Keyes did not deal with the Githyanki's inside, then after losing their minds, they would only have two endings, dying of thirst or starvation. Now, the Red Dragon-class mothership had no one to take care of it. It could only be forced to land on the ground under the pressure of the giant monster. In the process of pressing down on the Githyanki mothership, Kith's sharp dragon claws pierced through the hull of the spaceship. His head directly penetrated into the bridge of the spaceship. Blazing lightning and pure force fields spurted out along with his breath. The silver swords, the medal of honor, the combat uniforms of the Githyankis, and their bodies were all destroyed in an instant. Only some ashes and twisted metal were left, scattered in every corner of the bridge. Without human control, Keyes drove the Red Dragon-class mothership like a hoverboard and plunged into the ocean outside Chuyin City. The mothership that entered the water stirred up huge waves. Together with foam, seaweed, and broken ship debris, the waves surged towards Yun City on the shore. If it were to be hit by such a tsunami, not many people would be left alive in the former capital of Japan. Keyes, who regarded it as his own, naturally would not sit back and watch such a thing happen. Moreover, he had previously received a gift from the ancient brown dragon, Firmin Dis, which was a gift from the ancient brown dragon. The Demolik Snade carried a totem pole that had absorbed enough elemental power from the sand waterfall burial spell. He arrived at the coast before the waves approached and planted the equipment used by the camels of the island world to fight against the demonic fish at the bottom of Yun City. By mobilizing the elemental power in the totem pole, the Demolik quickly constructed a breakwater of more than 20 yards high. The surging Megalosaurus hit the breakwater and turned it into a pool of broken foam. Then, following the breakwater, it slowly flowed out of the harbor of Yun City. There are still some guests left to deal with. He signaled to Snade. Then, he spread his wings and flew into the sky. He flew straight towards the business district of Yun City, one after another. I'm afraid they can't wait any longer. The huge Megalosaurus flew over Yun City. The shadow cast by its spread wings almost covered the entire city. Not only the Japanese, but even the Megalosaurus warriors led by Firmin Dis were terrified when they saw this scene. If the previous Megalosaurus, disguised as Keyes, was like an adult and a child, then in front of the real Keyes, they were as small as ants. Although this was an exaggeration, in the food chain of the multiverse, the relationship between them and Keyes was most likely between predator and prey. No matter how hard they tried to deny the reality, they did not think that they had a chance of winning against such a huge Megalosaurus. After all, in a battle between Megalosaurus, the bigger the body, the more advantageous it would be. They had just experienced a fierce battle and were now exhausted. Unless they could immediately cast some legendary spells, no matter how hard they tried, they would not be able to carry out the task given by the Dragon Queen. No matter what, we have to end this mutated dragon. Firmin Dis looked around at the other Megalosaurus warriors, but his swollen eyes and the spikes on his face made his words seem weak. This is Lord Tiamat's order. This is suicide. Our Lord only gave an order, but he did not set a time limit. We can take a long time. The tail full of spikes stabbed into the eyes of the fat black dragon, and then stirred a little to destroy his brain, and at the same time prevent him from saying more sensible suggestions. Firmin Dis continued to announce to the other Megalosaurus warriors in a somewhat deranged tone. Look, killing an unprepared Megalosaurus, such as a self-righteous mutated dragon, is so easy. As he spoke, the other Megalosaurus warriors retreated, and they used their bodies to express their true thoughts. Although these Pinochet dragons had the title of Tiamat's warriors, they were still Pinochet dragons in essence, and selfishness was their indelible nature. To face death for the god they believed in, they might be able to do it, but to die for the will of a stupid and crazy ancient brown dragon, sorry, they really could not do it. You all have a heated discussion. Unknowingly, the shadow cast by the sky disappeared without a trace, and a humanoid figure suddenly appeared above Firmin Dis's head. Keys played with a warhammer cast in the shape of a dragon's head and greeted all the Megalosaurus warriors face to face, causing them to be inexplicably frightened. "No one can stand on top of my head." Bang! Chapter 592. It was the most thought-provoking scene. The small hammer in Keys's hand, Hammer, had an intimate contact with the head of Nephman Dis. After that, all the Megalosaurus warriors chose to submit, including the cunning Azure Bloodstorm. They all went through a blasphemy ceremony. During this ceremony, they spurned Tiamat's sacred emblem. Since then, these so-called Megalosaurus warriors no longer had the chance to serve their original mistress. If they stood in front of the Penishade Dragon Queen, they would be attacked by the gods immediately. After the blasphemy ceremony, they were also forced to sign a hell contract with Keys. The one who drafted it was the diplomat Numun, who had inherited all the abilities of the contract demon. This contract stipulated that they had to serve the young blue dragon for free for the next 1,000 years. Otherwise, they would be regarded as breaching the contract and would be targeted by the assassin demon of the 9 prisons of Bader until they died. After dealing with these trivial matters, Keys even flew to the low Earth orbit and dragged the few specially made Githyanki spaceships into the Ashen world. Together with the Snake Stallion-class spaceships that he had previously destroyed, he piled them all in the ocean outside Izumo City. Surrounding the mothership that pierced diagonally into the sea, Keys made it into an artificial island for the engineer Shay to study the Githyanki technology. After everything had come to an end, the task of finding traces of Stim was once again placed on the young blue dragon's desk. One task after another, leaving him almost no time to rest. However, this feeling of fullness made him feel as if it was malt sugar. To be honest, Keys still had no idea how to deal with the god of virtual games. Although he had only had contact with this dwarf god in the bottomless abyss, he still lacked some detailed information. Where did he ascend to godhood? Which plane were his believers in? Where was his divine kingdom hidden? Keys didn't know any of these questions at the moment. Even though he had spent a lot of resources and had Snade hold several prophecies, the information he obtained was vague and couldn't be used as a reference. His magic consultant guessed that it might be because the prophecy involved the gods, triggering some deeply hidden protective mechanism in the multiverse. "Magic isn't omnipotent," Quest said as he sat in the meeting room of the Japanese Senate. He held a cup of tea in his hand and savored the taste of the drink while thinking to himself. Sometimes we still have to use traditional means to get information. The so-called traditional methods were nothing more than 2 types: investigation and purchase. With the current situation, Keys still could not spread his network across the multiverse and had no way of investigating, which was why he could only think of ways to purchase information about Stim from certain places. As for a suitable seller, the young blue dragon already had a plan in mind, and he had some contact with him. Yes, it was the Gods Not Gods Association. In terms of understanding of the gods, unless one was qualified to enter the Pantheon Temple to spy, there was no organization in the multiverse that knew more about the gods than the Gods Not Gods Association. After all, they claimed to be the enemy of all gods, and collecting information about their enemies was probably one of their daily jobs. From Keys's understanding, the association had built many fortresses in the multiverse, just like the Entropy City of the Doom Guardians that he had been to before. However, the fortresses of the Gods Not Gods Association were built in the inner plane or on the huge divinity corpses in the astral plane because they could avoid the power of the gods in those places. If Keys wanted to trade information, it was definitely not a wise move to go to their armed fortresses. The only choice left was to go to the headquarters of the Gods Not Gods Association, the broken temple in the lower city of Sigil City, to trade information. This was not a risk-free act. In fact, going to Sigil City was a risk in itself. Especially for powerful beings, the risk of going to Sigil City could be raised to an unbearable level. If ordinary mortals arrived at Sigil City, they might be able to survive for 10 days to half a month, or even a lifetime was not impossible. However, powerful gods might be annihilated by the Lady of Pain the moment they arrived. Due to this situation, It was important to have a guide who was familiar with the many hidden rules of Sigil City. Fortunately, one of Keys's companions, the half-goat Puu, had lived there since he was young. What? Impossible. Hearing that Quith wanted to go to Sigil City, Puu shook his head like a rattle drum and immediately rejected the idea. Hey, buddy, although you're not the kind of idiot who doesn't know much about the material plane, that place is definitely not some place of entertainment, and it's not a place you can go whenever you want. Besides, I've sworn that as long as that mad goat is still running a shop in Sigil City, I'll never go back. Only he is the true 1,000 Herbs Cup there, and I, Puu, can only be the 100 Herbs pouch. You're not alone. Keys interrupted Puu's words and said with a smile, I'll go with you, and you'll return with a full load. Think about it. How about opening a 1,000 Herbs Hall in Sigil City? Your taste is 10 times better than that of the 1,000 Herbs Cup, so you should have a shop that matches your status. Previously, you could only stay in the shop of the 1,000 Herbs Cup because you lacked an investor with a discerning eye. But now, you have my friendship and the support of the scale of perpetual order. If you want to replace your uncle's position, what you lack is an attempt. If you don't try, how can you be sure that you can't do it? Who says I can't do it? It's just that his reputation is accumulated bit by bit, and we're new here. Don't worry, this is a long-term investment. I believe in your knowledge and taste in herbs. At the same time, I also hope that my friend can put on a show of the return of the king and teach those arrogant fellows in Sigil City a lesson. It had to be admitted that Keys's words were extremely provocative, and they directly hit Puu's sore spot. Therefore, he quickly changed his attitude and began to prepare for his return to Sigil City. The young blue dragon also asked the scale of perpetual order to cooperate fully and collect all kinds of materials needed to open up the market. The shop that Puu was about to open would also provide Keys with a legal identity in Sigil City. Chapter 593. For mortals in ordinary material planes, or even some powerful beings in the inner or outer planes who were not well informed, how to get to Sigil City was actually a mystery. Perhaps they spent thousands of wealth to get spellcasters to create the gate between worlds, but it was not as likely to be connected to Sigil City as a farmer occasionally found a hole when cleaning the embers of his stove. But this situation would not happen to Puu. As a half-goat who grew up in Sigil City, he naturally knew many ways to return home that others did not know. He only lit a morning star grass, and the intoxicating smoke that rose quickly attracted the attention of a merchant wandering in the astral world. This person was a member of the Sense Association in Sigil City, which was also a perceptor. This astral world merchant had light blue skin, and there was a gill-like breathing organ on his neck. His height was almost the same as an ordinary mortal. He had a nose, mouth, and ears, but no eyes. In the place where the eyes should have been, there was a sensory belt wrapped around the skull. In order to enhance their senses, some members of the sensory society would adjust their sensory organs. He had given up his eyes in exchange for this artificial organ. I never have to look back because I can take care of all directions. The astral world merchant named Wogu shook hands with the half-goat Puu and then jokingly said his catchphrase. After that, he began to ask about business matters. Hey man, why are you in such a remote plane? If it weren't for my talent, it might take 8 to 10 years to get here. Or is there some magical herb in this plane? You must share your new feelings with old Wogu because I can give you a good price. Come on, Wogu. Puu interrupted the astral merchant's incessant words. I've asked you to come here this time because I want to return to Sigil City. I found an investor who's willing to fund a new medicinal shop for me. With that, he gestured to Quest. The young blue dragon, who had transformed into his human form, stood behind Wogu and nodded to the observant astral world merchant. Knowing Puu's needs, Wogu was too lazy to continue to try to talk. He directly offered a price of 30 platinum coins per person for the use of the portal. You know, I recently opened a business near Mountain Paradise, so I need that kind of currency. Of course, if you pay with Mabius coins and iridescent stones, I can also accept it. But the exchange ratio needs to be adjusted slightly. The so-called platinum coins were the heaven coins. It got its name from the 5th layer of Mountain Paradise, Platinum Heaven. Nevertheless, the heavenly creatures often regarded it as an insult. They felt that it was blasphemy to associate such a sacred place with filthy coins. However, it was undeniable that platinum coins were a popular method of payment in large transactions. Each platinum coin was worth about 5 gold coins. Depending on the amount of gold and platinum in different planes, the exchange rate would fluctuate slightly. However, most of the time, the degree of fluctuation was not large. Generally speaking, platinum coins and gold coins were very firm. Wogu, 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 and wogu, 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 and wogu, 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 wogu. Wogu had a strange object, and its function was very simple. It could only temporarily summon a portal. It was just that this portal was connected to Sigil City, and the astral merchant was only allowed to let the official members of the Feeling Society or a small number of people who were guaranteed by the official members of the Feeling Society to use this portal. Every time someone asked him to use this portal, he would charge a corresponding fee. I feel that this is a good business. I wish you a good journey. See you in Sigil City. Poets were always keen on telling the glory of the city, praising the afterglow of the sunset, and describing the gentle laughter in their city. But no poet used this method to praise Sigil City. They always called it Cage City. In their eyes, Sigil City was a dark, damp, and dirty place, full of noise and quarrels, smooth stones, and razor vines. This was not the only nickname of Sigil City. Because there were countless portals in this city, many people, including the local residents of Sigil City, would also call it Gate City. As a huge city, Sigil City itself did not have any natural resources needed to build a city. There are no quarries outside the city, no wood transported through the river, and even the materials needed to build the most crude huts were not available. Even so, the city renowned across the multiverse was never barren. Everything needed to build anything came from the outside world. The only thing that was needed was a portal to the place where the imported raw materials were produced. It was not like some towns famous for its white marble or neatly planned roadside trees. Because when building Sigil City, almost all imaginable building materials were used. There was never a uniform arrangement, and this situation continued. In most cases, the residents of Sigil City would make good use of the resources they could get. This meant that if you saw someone building a fence around their garden by mixing the steel shards of Shuraba, the giant pine towers of the Wild Wild, and the floating stones of the Fire Elementium Plain, it would not be surprising at all. Because if you looked carefully, you would find a more imaginative combination. But just like the Batsa Devil, who had many residents from the 9 prisons of Bader and Sigil City, often said, even in the sea of chaos, there will still be a singularity stone. Sigil City still hid some order. In terms of buildings, although each building had distinct characteristics, from a macroscopic view, the buildings in each specific area actually had a similar style. They must meet the function of that area. If they could not meet the functional requirements, most of the buildings would not survive. Houses are used, not for speculation. Puwu stepped out of the portal and looked at the surrounding environment to determine the location of himself and keys. Although the portal of the astral merchants was connected to Sigil City, in this city where everything was possible, the portal could not be guaranteed to open in the same place every time. When he saw a flag fluttering on a building by the street with a tongue embroidered with silver thread, Puwu immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He explained to Quess, "This is Silver Tongue, located at the junction of Kinwell Street and Blackwater Road. This is one of the strongholds of the Feeling Society. It's not far from the land of bards, which is the so-called Bumpkin Street. There are no diehards patrolling." Chapter 594. Hey, you two strong birds. Puwu and Keys had just stood still for a while when a short and stout Earth Spirit Bear greeted them very politely. He was the captain of the sedan bearers. Due to the lack of livestock like horses in Sigil City, most of the items were carried by other creatures. Sedan chairs could be rented in the vicinity of large markets or important buildings, such as the Civic Hall or the Sunken Square. Each sedan chair could carry 2 human-sized creatures. They were all covered with silk or velvet curtains to ensure privacy and keep out the cold. They call us strong birds, but they actually treat us as fools. The sedan share bearer's flirtation caused Pu Wu to reveal a mocking smile. He secretly gestured to Keys and said, "Ignore them. There's definitely something strange in that sedan share." As a native citizen of Sigil City, Pu Wu's understanding of this city was only slightly inferior to Daba's and the others. He knew very well where the sedan share bearer should appear, and those places definitely did not include the vicinity of Silvertongue. Because this was the territory of the Intuition Association, this association required its members to try their best to sense the multiverse with their own bodies, so they did not advocate sitting in sedan chairs. In addition, this place was very close to Country Street. These Earth Spirit Bears most likely treated Keys and Pu Wu as country bumpkins who had just arrived in Sigil City and were trying to trick them into sitting in their sedan chairs. And there was most likely something fishy hidden in that sedan chair. Pu Wu glanced at the sedan chair bearer's slender fingers that did not resemble those of Earth Spirit Bear, and roughly determined his identity. Pu Wu brought Keys along the road without looking back. They were heading to the large market to rent a shop. "Those fellows should be framers," the half-goat said softly. "They have mastered the craft of using tripping ropes and pedals to harm others. But looking at their race, I don't think they have mastered the craft well. But as long as they sit in that sedan chair, the country bumpkins from the ordinary material plane will most likely have a few more holes in their bodies. It's even more likely that their buttocks will burst open, and losing their wallets will be the inevitable result." Keys readily accepted the half-goat's decision. He had come to Sigil City to trade information, so there was no need for him to cause trouble on the day he arrived. But sometimes, things were just so strange. You clearly wanted to avoid them, but they just had to come closer. When the Earth Spirit Bears saw that Pu Wu was ignoring them, they carried the palanquin and chased after him, blocking the narrow path. "I'm very sorry." The captain of the Bear Earth Spirit palanquin was like a tilted beer barrel. He bowed slightly, and then pretended to be polite as he said to Pu Wu and Keys, "The situation is not good recently. The business competition is too serious. Therefore, it's best that the two of you listen to my advice and sit on the palanquin obediently, so as to avoid unnecessary trouble. If things go wrong, you might even get hurt." Hearing the other party's threat, Pu Wu could not help but put his hand on his forehead. "First of all, how do you know that you can definitely defeat us? Is it just because you have two more people, or is it because you look more unsightly?" The half-goat man tossed 2 pieces of belladonna into his mouth, chewing as he taunted the Earth Bear Spirit Bear captain. "Secondly, I'm sorry, is the jargon of the face dancers. You casually plagiarize it and use it. Aren't you afraid that the news will spread to the Thorn guest house, and those bloodthirsty fellows will immediately come to visit you?" When the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer captain heard the rhetorical question, he still maintained a fake smile on his face. However, when Pu Wu said the words face dancers and Thorn guest house, his face began to gradually change color. What Pu Wu said was not information that could be grasped by a fool. He really misjudged. The half-goat man and the human in front of him did not seem to be country bumpkins. Therefore, he decided to gain the initiative by striking first. That's right. Since he knew that Pu Wu and Keys were not to be trifled with, the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer captain felt that he could not let them go. Firstly, they did have the advantage in numbers. Secondly, he was afraid that the two of them would seek revenge on them. If that happened, they would be even more passive. "Let's go together. They might be strong birds. Don't let them walk out of this alley." Achoo! The half-goat man who was chewing on the snacks sneezed at the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer in front of him. The belladonna he chewed actually turned into a puff of smoke. It suddenly spurted out of his nostrils and accurately landed on the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer captain's face. Under the numbing effect of this herb, the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer captain almost bit off his own tongue. Blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. Other than his quick reaction, Pu Wu's poisonous smoke affected a very wide area. Not only was the Earth Bear Spirit Bearer captain affected, but the other 4 Earth Bear Spirit Bearers who were carrying the palanquin had just taken out their weapons when they were enveloped by the poisonous smoke. Pu Wu, who had tasted more than 10,000 types of poisonous herbs, had too many residues in his mouth. Together with the belladonna as the main ingredient, it directly formed a new poison that took effect quickly and was difficult to resist. The earth bear spirit bearers stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Only their eyeballs could move freely. Their eyes revealed an indescribable fear. I forgot to introduce myself. Pooh Woo swallowed the remnants of the belladonna into his stomach and then said, "I'm Pooh Woo Thousand Herb Cup. I want to open my own herb shop in Gate City. Originally, I wanted to welcome you to wait for a few days and then come to my shop to buy a special antidote. It's a pity that this place is not too far from the Death Council's morgue. There will always be some corpse collectors who come to pick up the corpses on the streets. You probably won't have the chance to buy anything in my shop." After saying this, Pooh Woo gestured to Keys and then continued to lead the way. After they went around the palanquin, the young blue dragon turned back and looked at the earth bear's spirit bearers playfully. His palm moved upwards without leaving a trace. The palanquin in the middle of the narrow alley was lit up by the fire ignition technique. The velvet roof of the palanquin began to burn, indicating the location of the corpse collectors. "We'll go to the big market and apply to the business association there. Then we'll buy a shop." After cleaning up the trash behind him, Pooh Woo's mood became more relaxed. His words also became more relaxed. P.S. Below is not counted in the word count. Created as Scales of Eternity, Discussion Group 618382262. Everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. Currently, there's an outline, part of the manga format that I drew, an introduction to the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes highlights of the creation, please join in. Chapter 595. Spreading out the map of Sigil City, people could see that the shape of this place was different from all other places. Of course, if one did not use a map, if one had read Asimov's Milky Way Empire or had some understanding of astrophysics, one would still be able to see the unusual features of Sigil City. The city was like a tire without a hub, and the city was built on the inner tube. In the center of it was a towering mountain called the Wuji Peak. No one knew where it came from, and no one knew where its peak led to. Sigil City rotated around the Wuji Peak, using centrifugal force to simulate gravity, and using the angle between the street and the Wuji Peak to describe time. Yes, the different districts of Sigil City had different areas. And just like those messy buildings, as long as they could bear the corresponding functions, no one would bother to set a uniform standard for them. The residents here were used to using words such as peak, anti-peak, peak, and other terms to time. Except for the 3 hours before and after the peak, the light of Sigil City was actually quite friendly to photosensitive creatures. There was no dazzling sunlight during the day here, but a cold light similar to that of fluorescent lamps. During the anti-peak, which was the nighttime period that the bumpkins of the material plane were usually used to, Sigil City also had a sky full of stars. It was just that they were not real stars. If one's eyes were sharp enough, one would be able to see that they were actually the shining lights of other streets. From Keys's perspective, although this city was not as large as the 9 prisons of Bader, which easily covered the entire plane, it was still very large. Whether it was the capital city of the mortal kingdom in the material plane, or the super cities on Earth in the previous life of the young blue dragon, the scale of Sigil City was definitely not small. In this way, unless one had wings or other means of flight that could directly fly over the Wuji Peak, it would definitely take some effort to cross from one street to another. If one wanted to question, for example, if the demons of the lower realm basically had the ability to teleport, or if a spellcaster could open a portal or something like that. But this was Sigil City, a city with countless open and hidden portals. It was definitely not a wise choice to casually teleport. Fortunately, the big market that Keys and Pooh Woo were going was not too far away from Silvertongue. Because it was a place for trading goods, it was best to be close to those rich country bumpkins. Therefore, there were only 3 intersections between the big market and the country bumpkin street. Moreover, Pooh Woo knew many shortcuts, and he could always bring Quest along to take a shortcut. Hey, Jamie Beekman. Walking to the side of the big market and passing by a tailor shop, Pu-Wu greeted the owner inside. It seemed that the two of them had some friendship. How's the business recently? How are the evening gowns for the astral world apostles coming along? The owner of the tailor shop was a humanoid creature with 4 arms. He walked out and bumped fists with Pu-Wu. The other 3 arms were busy tattooing a waistcoat with liquid gold patterns. Hey man, where have you been recently? The aromatherapy idea you gave me before was not bad. I wanted to buy some lavender from you. Although the 1,000 Herb cup also has that kind of herb, I don't dare to buy anything from them. That thing might have some strange effects. A wise choice. Pu-Wu nodded. Lavender with purple spots, right? That's a new breed that he cultivated using the eggshell of a broodmother spider as a petri dish. After igniting it, the aromatherapy not only can smoke clothes, it can also induce vomiting. Fortunately, we didn't buy it, or else you would be in big trouble. But it's okay, you can come to my shop to buy it later. Before they finished chatting, there was suddenly a terrifying noise from afar. Keys looked towards the direction of the noise. But who would have thought that he would see a scene that could be described as unsightly? It turned out that there was a half-goat running naked over there. He was jumping and running, knocking over one temporary stall after another, squeezing open the ladder under the feet of the boy who lit the lamp, and his mouth kept shouting, "Wooly! Wooly!" At this time, Pu-Wu had already put his hand on his forehead. Damn it, the disgraceful fellow is here again. He pulled Keys and turned into the alley at the side of the street. It was even faster than a 100-meter sprint. It turned out that the half-goat running naked was his uncle, Wooly 1,000 Herb cup. Looking at him, Pu-Wu knew that he must have tried some new kind of special medicine. Pu-Wu, who felt that he had lost face, did not even have the thought of greeting Wooly 1,000 Herb cup. He brought Keys to avoid the chaotic main road of the big market, followed the small path left and right, and soon arrived near a building in the big market. This place was different from the other places in the big market. There was basically no noise. It was very quiet. There were only a few humanoid creatures with thin bodies and triangular beaks on their heads, cleaning the razor vines that covered the walls of the building. They were Dabbas. They were the servants and masters of the Sigil City. These creatures only lived in the Gate City. They could not be found in any other plane. No Dabbas would ever leave the Sigil City. Based on this situation, some strong birds speculated that Dabbas was just a manifestation of the metabolism of the organism in the Sigil City. This did not sound unreasonable, because it was these creatures that maintained the normal operation of the city's infrastructure. Most of the time, Dabbas were repairing the Sigil City. They strengthened the drainage channels and mausoleums under the streets, uprooted the overgrown razor vines, paved the cobblestone roads, and repaired the crumbling houses in the city. In the eyes of many, Dabbas were just mysterious and reserved workers. But those people were a bunch of idiots. Pu-Wu, who grew up in the Sigil City, knew that Dabbas represented the Lady of Pain. They served the Lady of Pain. Although they were indifferent to ordinary crimes such as murder or fraud, Dabbas would appear if anyone dared to destroy the Sigil City, or if they were plotting something related to the Lady of Pain. At that time, they would resort to force, using violent means to directly kill those who disrespected the Lady of Pain, or banish them to the depths of the ether to imprison them. Other than that, Pu-Wu also knew that Dabbas were in charge of managing all the land in the Sigil City. Most of the idiots would be deceived by those associations and rent the right to use the land from them. But the half-goat knew that that was not safe. Only by finding the management office that Dabbas had set up in each district, reporting to them, and buying from them could they obtain the rights to the protected land. P.S. Below is not counted in the word count. A discussion group for Scales of Eternity has been established. 6183822262. Everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. Currently, there's an outline, part of the manga form that I drew, an introduction to the Easter egg, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life are being released in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes highlights of the creation, please join in. Chapter 596. Hello, madam. Pu-Wu walked up to one of the Dabbas and greeted him. Then he told him his intentions. Mr. Dabbas, I'm an official member of the Intuition Society because I have many years of experience in the cultivation of herbs and the production of various potions. I'm here to apply for a fixed stall in the Sigil City Grand Market." Hearing the words of the half-goat, the Dabas raised his head. His dark eyes stared at Pu Wu for a while. Then he slowly said, "Race, out is half-goat. Name, Pu Wu Thousand Herb Cup. Lived in the Sigil City for more than 30 years. Cultivation of herbs at the elite level, potion concoction at the master level. Identification complete. The situation is true. Approval required." "Approved. Approved." After the Dabas finished speaking, the nearby Dabas also repeated the same words in a low voice. Keys, who was standing behind Pu Wu, felt a strange fluctuation of psionic power. The Dabas seemed to be connected and quickly passed on the permission to Pu Wu to open the shop. Not long after, all the Dabas in the Sigil City knew about the situation. After completing the authorization, the Dabas used his slender fingers to take out a pipe-like object from the small bag on his waist. He put the straw in his mouth and gently exhaled. A light smoke ring gushed out from it. The smoke ring floated in front of the half-goat and suddenly turned into a jade-like texture. Pu Wu reached out and took the ring. Find and planned 33 square meters of land in the Grand Market area. You can build any building of any shape, but it can only be used to operate a herb shop or a potion shop. Every year at this time, we will collect 13% of the previous year's income as a tax for the repair and management of the Sigil City. As long as the tax is paid, the shop can continue to exist. After finishing all the requirements, the Dabas ignored Pu Wu and turned his head to continue cleaning the razor vines that were growing recklessly on the wall. The half-goat bent down and pulled out a tough enough razor vine from the ground. He brushed off the sharp leaves on it and pierced the vine on the jade ring. Then, he wore it as a necklace around his neck. "That's it?" Keys asked curiously. Pu Wu patted his chest. "That's right. The shop we're going to open in Sigil City has already been authorized. It's a legal business and will be protected by the lady and these Mr. Dabas." His voice was much more cheerful. "As long as the shop is established, no association has the right to come here and collect illegal taxes. Look, this is the difference between a strong bird and an idiot." Keys nodded. He and the half-goat man left the Daba Management Center. Although the paperwork to open the shop had already been prepared, in theory, they just needed to find a suitable piece of land, draw a circle on the chalk, and set up a shed to start the business. But that kind of business obviously wouldn't be good. After all, no one would be willing to spend a lot of gold coins in a place that didn't look fancy. They had to build a conspicuous building to front the shop. Before coming to Sigil City, in addition to preparing the raw materials for the goods to be sold, as well as some production tools, Keys also specially asked the scale of Perpetual Order to prepare sufficient construction materials. Therefore, after finding a suitable place, they immediately called a few stone giants who were squatting in the big market to start the construction work. Those stone giants were obviously familiar with the work of building a house. First, they used their own tools to quickly dig a large hole more than 10 yards deep in the area marked by Pu Wu. Then, under the command of Keys, they poured the mixed mud into the foundation. Together with the young blue dragon's mud-to-stone spell, a pure granite foundation of 33 square meters was quickly built. Then, the stone giants inserted the polished marble pillars into the holes in the foundation. Because the stonemasons had already made the mortise and tenon structure on these parts in the Ash World, these stone giants only needed to nest the parts one by one like building blocks. Every time a layer was made, Keys would cast a spell to close the gap between the mortise and tenon. In this way, thanks to a group of extremely strong workers and a powerful spellcaster, a 10-story building quickly rose from the ground. The eyes of many people in the big market were focused on the sudden appearance of this tall building. Many people were guessing that building such a tall shop, could it be that they wanted to sell some rare luxury accessories? As the first shop he had invested in Sigil City, Keys had a special plan for Pu Wu's 1,000 Herb Hall. He had even reserved an office for himself on the top floor. In order to make it convenient for customers and staff to go up and down, as well as to save space, there were no stairs connecting each floor of the building. It was only equipped with an iron cage decorated with pine wood and an outdoor elevator made of steel cables. After completing the construction work, Keyes straightforwardly paid the stone giants as an affirmation of their hard work. Then he took out an alarm, clock-like object and installed it at the entrance of the shop to announce the time and other functions. Finally, he cast another clean-up spell on the building. The covering paste that was originally used to protect the relief on the stone slab immediately turned into dust and drifted away with the wind, revealing many decorations in the shape of herbs. With a snap of his fingers, the automatic cauldron placed on the 5th floor of the pharmaceutical workshop began to operate. A large amount of smoke was discharged from the cauldron through the pipes, and then discharged into the underground tunnels of Sigil City through this safety valve. There was a specially made medicine in the smoke that could stimulate the nerves of rodents, making them more excited and active. Long before coming to Sigil City, Keyes had done his homework. He studied a large amount of materials related to the Gods, Not Gods Association. He had a thorough plan on how to contact the association, establish a connection, and finally be able to buy information from them. And the first step of this plan was related to the Broken Temple where the Gods, Not Gods Association was located. The Broken Temple was located in the lower city. It was the intersection of many underground pipelines in Sigil City and was very close to the sewage treatment plant. The reason why Keyes wanted to discharge the special smoke into the underground tunnels was to stimulate the rodents to gather at the Broken Temple. After creating a problem, the Thousand Herb Hall, as a herb shop, would naturally be able to provide a solution to the problem. Chapter 597. It didn't matter if it was a human or a rat. Even the most satisfactory arrangement was bound to have accidents. Tens of thousands of rats lived in the sewers below Sigil City, known as the Nest. They gave the professional rat catchers in the city a headache. But in addition to ordinary rats, there was also a mutated species known as the headcover rat, living in the nest. These mutated rats had evolved amazing abilities. Under their protruding skulls, there were organs similar to receivers and transmitters that could transmit various information to their companions within a short distance. A headcover rat might only be a little stronger than ordinary rats, but when a group of them gathered together, they would have the ability to think no less than an intelligent creature. What was even more terrifying was that this ability would increase with the growth of the headcover rat group. When a sufficient number of headcap rats gathered, they would even evolve enough intelligence to cast spells. Every headcover rat was a nerve node. The tricks used by the professional rat catchers would all be recorded by the headcover rat group and come up with a way to crack them. There were some rat catchers who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth who tried to use their innate ability to enslave the headcover rats for their own use. But in the end, they were retaliated against by the headcover rats. In front of the headcover rat group of group consciousness, they were as weak as babies and as stupid as idiots on their first day in Sigil City. Not long after, all the rat catchers in Sigil City were buried in the sewers. If it weren't for the fact that there were other street scourges living in the sewers, the wolves that were as ferocious as wolves and had the vitality of cockroaches, and the rotten insect that had the bloodline of the legendary creature purple worm, they restricted the development of the headcover rat group. Perhaps these mutated rats with group consciousness would have rushed out of the sewers and become the overlords of Sigil City. When facing the headcover rat, even if there was only one headcover rat in front of them, the professional rat catchers would immediately choose to turn around and leave. Because they knew the habits of these mutated rats very well, they knew that as long as they hurt one headcover rat, they would one day be retaliated against by the entire headcover rat group. There was no doubt that this choice was very wise. But today, the rat catchers who were busy setting up traps in the sewers all began to doubt their lives. Spotted above. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? A rat catcher with the bloodline of a catman quickly ran through the sewers. He prayed as he ran. Why are there so many headcover rats coming out at the same time? Could it be that they want to occupy Imprint City? Of course, his guess was a little exaggerated, but it was completely understandable for him to have such a thought in view of the tide of rats. After running for a long distance, the rat catcher found the hole he had used to enter the sewer. Without hesitation, he climbed out of the manhole and temporarily covered the manhole cover with 2 rocks and 2 iron bars. However, these measures did not stop the rats for long. Following a series of chirping noises, a fireball flew out from the group of rats and accurately hit the manhole cover. Rocks, iron bars, and manhole covers were all blown away. A large number of rats crawled out of the open manhole. Fortunately, the professional rat catcher had already run far away. Sesame oil. We want sesame oil. Head cover rat must eat the sesame oil. Group consciousness could control the activities of the headcap rats, but was also the embodiment of the common needs of all the headcap rats. When all the headcap rats were thinking about the same thing, then the group consciousness had to do its best to satisfy the wishes of the headcap rats. If they wanted to eat the sesame oil, then the group consciousness had to find a suitable place for them to eat. Thus, the headcap rats came to the Broken Temple. As the former temple area of Imprint City, before the various gods became enemies with the Lady of Pain, many temples of various sizes were built here. In order to worship the gods, the temples stored large amounts of sesame oil in their warehouses. When the Lady of Pain expelled all the gods from Imprint City and destroyed this temple area, the Gods Not Gods Association took over this place. They named the ruins of this temple the Broken Temple. The holy oil that was used to worship the gods was now splashed on the statues and portraits of the gods, or simply used as fuel to light the lamps at night. At night, starlight would light up in every corner of the Broken Temple, as if to tell everyone that the dazzling gods were now only left with this bit of brilliance. Later on, this custom of lighting the lamps with holy oil at night was preserved. Every once in a while, the Gods Not Gods Association would collect a batch of sesame oil from other planes and transport it to the Broken Temple. Many of the residents of Imprint City knew this story, and coincidentally, the headcap rats were also one of the people who knew about it. However, due to the prestige of the Gods Not Gods Association, the headcap rats rarely came to the Broken Temple. At most, there would be a few greedy fellows who left the group and came to steal a bite. But today, you didn't know what went wrong. All the headcap rats were inexplicably greedy for the sesame oil. Although the group consciousness understood that this was not a rational choice, when all the headcap rats had this idea, even it could not go against the will of the group. Thus, the headcap rats rushed all the way to the Broken Temple. Of course, because of the group consciousness, the headcap rats were not stupid enough to let themselves be cannon fodder first. Through a strange ability, they urged many ordinary headcap rats to come together. The cunning group consciousness ordered the ordinary headcap rats to attack the Broken Temple, then waited for them to steal some lamp oil and transport it out, allowing the headcap rats to feast on it. With a series of ear-piercing chirping sounds, tens of thousands of rats were like arrows that had left the bow, quickly running toward the Broken Temple. Their dark gray fur was like a dirty blanket on the ground. The Gods Not Gods Association, standing guard outside the Broken Temple, were not blind. When they saw the headcap rats madly rushing toward the headquarters, they immediately sounded the alarm. Then all sorts of traps were activated, and more Gods Not Gods Association guards came running out. These people were divided into 3 factions according to the association's factions: challengers, divinity agnostics, and lost ones, and defended against the headcap rats separately. The first faction was mostly made up of warlike tieflings and some blasphemous priests. The other 2 factions were made up of creatures from other races. Most of them used to believe in a certain god, but now their hearts were filled with doubt and denial. Although these 3 factions were usually at odds with each other, when faced with the headcap rats that dared to attack the association's headquarters, their attitudes were unprecedentedly united. Kill these filthy rats. Chapter 598. People always made misjudgments because of their size. Seeing a group of tiny rats, the members of the Gods Not Gods Association were stunned, but they were not afraid. In their eyes, perhaps the blasphemy sorcerers only needed to cast a few spells to drive the animals away to solve the current problem. If it were in the past, this idea might not be a problem, but now they were facing a crazy group of headless rats. Driven by their appetites, these guys no longer cared about the consequences. They spared no effort to drive the ordinary rats toward the broken temple. Sesame oil. Delicious and delicious. Sweet after a full stomach. Headless rats should eat sesame oil. In the collective consciousness of the rats, all kinds of praises for the sesame oil had been expressed. This made them numb to the pain of individuals and ignore the threat of death. They even began to clamor, wanting the powerful headless rats to charge personally. After a fierce battle that lasted half an hourglass, the area around the broken temple was covered with a layer of rat carpet. The dirty dead rats were about to fill up the gravel and debris. Even so, the rats were still charging forward recklessly. At this time, some of the higher-ups of the Gods, Not Gods Association had noticed this situation. A blasphemy sorcerer walked out from the team of the challengers. He had once served a god in the nature domain and could steal some druid spells for his own use. This blasphemy sorcerer wore clothes made of leaves and grass and walked barefoot into the group of rats. As his two legs moved forward, his whole body gradually shrank. Gray hair extended from the surface of his skin. His mouth became long and narrow, and a long tail extended from his back. In the end, he became a rat, but he was much stronger than an ordinary rat. The disguised blasphemy sorcerer blended into the group of rats. He lurked close to the group of headless rats hiding behind the ordinary rats. While these crazy rats were unprepared, he quickly knocked out a headless rat and ran back to the guard area of the broken temple with it in his mouth. Then, he quickly changed back to his human appearance. He held the headless rat in his hand, but his mouth imitated the hissing sound of a viper's tongue. Let's see what's wrong with you guys hiding in the sewers today. Looking at the hostage who had just woken up, he licked his lips and extended his index finger that had grown a special tube-shaped object to poke it into the skull of the rat. With a tragic squeak, the blasphemy priest used his improved spell to invade the skull-cover rat's consciousness. Unlike what most people imagined, although the collective consciousness of the headcap rats was similar to a distributed database, each headcap rat that acted as a storage node actually had virtual information stored in their minds for a period of time. However, after being separated from the group, they lost their powerful thinking ability and were unable to read and process the information independently. However, this blasphemous priest who had once served a nature god had mastered a unique linked reading technique. Moreover, as a human spellcaster, with his thinking ability, as long as he didn't connect for too long, it wouldn't be a problem for him to steal some information from Cap Rat's collective consciousness. Under the protection of the other members of the Gods Association, this blasphemous priest connected for a full 2 to 3 minutes before he pulled the tube-shaped object out of the headcap rat's skull. He endured the discomfort and threw the dead hostage to the ground. Then he stretched out his foot and stomped on it. They want the sesame oil. Ignoring the surprised looks of others, the blasphemous priest directly took down the lamp hanging on the wall, opened the windshield, and threw the wick away. After that, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of the oil inside. Perhaps because he drank too fast, or perhaps because he drank too much, he suddenly squatted down while holding his stomach and spat out the sesame oil that he had just drunk. After doing all this, he felt a little better. When he was reading the information in the headcap rat's brain, to his surprise, those damn rats were obsessed with the sesame oil. So much so that he, who had established a temporary connection with the headcap rat's collective consciousness, was also affected. After cleaning his mouth a little, the blasphemous priest quickly walked into the ruins. Sesame oil? After hearing the blasphemous priest's report, the higher-ups of the Gods Association all felt that this was inconceivable. They had originally thought that this attack had been planned for a long time, and that it might have been related to the god slaves who had always been enemies of the god slaves. However, it turned out that the headcap rat had only dared to attack the Gods Association's headquarters because of the greedy rats in their stomachs. Who gave those rats the courage to do this? A tiefling warlord of the Challenger faction suddenly stood up from his seat. He slammed his hand heavily on the table in front of him, shattering it into pieces. I'm going to burn all those rats to ashes. This tiefling warlord, who had an inferno bloodline, started burning fiercely as he said this. The eel-lined monster sitting next to him couldn't help but shift his body. This was a strange creature with a glass jar on its neck. It was one of the core members of the divinity agnosticism faction. This creature appeared to be a hybrid between a humanoid creature and an eel. It had two thick and short limbs with bony pincers at the ends. Its two hind limbs were short and thick. This creature's face resembled an eel's, but had a terrifyingly large mouth with ring-shaped teeth. Be careful of your spit. The eel-lined monster reached out with a hand covered in mucus and patted the seagrass clothing that had been burned by the enraged tiefling sparks. It then spoke in a low and rumbling voice. We still haven't confirmed whether or not the god slaves are behind this attack. It's possible that those rats indeed attacked the broken temple because they wanted to eat the sesame oil. But why did they attack at this time of all times? It's still impossible for us to determine whether or not someone has interfered with their strange appetite. Although this creature looked like an eel, it wasn't stupid at all. What it said was indeed quite reasonable. The tiefling warlord with the short temper couldn't refute it. The tiefling warlord could only ask, then what do you have in mind? Are you going to allow those rats to continue attacking the God Slaves Association headquarters? Or is the God Slaves Association going to use the sesame oil as a compromise? P.S. The following won't count. I've created a Scales of Eternity comic discussion group, 6183822262. Everyone is welcome to join the discussion. So far, I've created a partial outline of my own comic, as well as an Easter egg introduction, historical information, and the author's daily life. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes details should join the discussion. Chapter 599. The Gods Are Not Gods Association wasn't completely united. They were divided into three factions based on their beliefs. The Challengers, the Gods Are Agnostic, and the Lost Ones. The Challengers were mostly members of the Tiefling Empire, as well as some blasphemous priests. The Gods Are Agnostic were mostly monsters. As for the Lost Ones, they were mostly priests or Templars who had lost their God's grace. Unless their leader, Turnus, was personally present, the core members of each faction would often have conflicts with each other. Since they had different beliefs, it was usually impossible for any of them to convince the other. Unfortunately, Turnus wasn't currently in Sigil City's Shattered Temple. Some time ago, the Apocalypse Guardians seemed to have some problems, causing them to retract their influence in many dimensions. In order to expand the Gods Are Not Gods Association faction's influence, Turnus left Sigil City and headed to the Chaos Association's stronghold in the astral plane. He wanted to benefit from this change. This way, only 12 members of the Chaos Association remained in Sigil City's Shattered Temple headquarters. These 12 members belonged to 3 different factions, with each faction having 4 members. However, they didn't have any conflicts of interest with each other. When something happened, these 12 members would vote on it. Only when more than 2/3 of the votes were passed would the decision be passed. The Tiefling warlords of the Challengers faction and the eel-string demons of the gods, our agnostic faction, had a disagreement with each other due to the sudden rat infestation. Although the Tiefling warlords were unable to question the eel-string demons' logical reasoning, they still instinctively questioned the latter. The eel-string demons had no choice but to respond in order to maintain their authority. Compromise? I don't think the Chaos Association has ever made such a decision before. Those rats definitely need to be dealt with. The Shattered Temple won't allow any other faction to enter. However, this is Sigil City, and the relationships between the various factions are complex. We can't easily escalate the situation. Besides, war is our last resort. If we casually use our final trump card, it'll easily cause other Chaos Association members to suspect that the Chaos Association is currently weak. The meddlesome managers of the Order Brotherhood, The Merciful Annihilation Association's butcher, the Chaos Association's lunatic, the Mystics of the Transcendence, and some other factions are all likely to test us. I'm sure everyone here knows what our leader is currently busy with. At present, as the backbone, the most important thing for us is to ensure that the association operates smoothly and without any mistakes. The eel-line monster looked at the tiefling warlord who was silently sitting down. Bubbles started popping up in the fish tank above his head. This was the species' self-satisfied laughter that no outsider could understand. That's why we need to ensure that the situation remains under control. We can't easily resort to violence. Everyone should know the saying, the hand behind the back is the most threatening. Moreover, this is Imprint City. We can buy all kinds of goods and services. In order to deal with the rat infestation, we can hire professional rat catchers. We can hire hundreds and thousands of them to deal with the rats. We can also buy thousands of rat traps. If that doesn't work, we can also buy anti-rat drugs. In short, we have many options. We don't necessarily have to resort to force. All the other Mage Association members fell silent upon hearing this. Even the fiery-tempered tiefling warlord didn't say anything else. In fact, the eel-line monster's words had greatly changed their perception of it. It was not until today that these backbones discovered that this old eel, who usually did not show off, turned out to be a slippery loach. There was indeed something in his head. I'd like to hear your opinion. It's clear, and easy to carry out. I'm sure you already have a plan. A Mage Association member, sitting on the other side of the table, spoke up as he used the table as support to stand up. All the backbones of the Mage Association remained silent upon hearing this. They waited for the eel-line monster to continue speaking. The person who stood up was the vice president of the Mage Association. He was the most authoritative member of the Mage Association. He was also a former member of the Tiefling Empire's royal family. His body was concealed by a hooded robe. Because of the hood, his face was obscured. However, his eyes shone with an orange light, leaving a deep impression on anyone who saw him. He was one of the founding members of the Gods, Not Gods Association. President Barnes relied on him as his right-hand man. Whenever the president was busy with other matters, he would have a lot of authority in the Temple of Ruins. The eel-line monster remained respectful towards such a powerful individual. He cautiously replied, "Based on the current situation, I'm thinking that the shape-shifting Mage Association member should come out and publicly offer a reward to the Rat Catcher Guild in Imprint City. As for the secret plan, he also needs to go to the market to purchase some rat catcher traps and rat poison potions. We're the ones spreading the news. After all, the rat catcher outbreak in the Temple of Ruins today will be impossible to prevent anyone from investigating. So, we might as well make a mistake and spread the news. Then, we'll observe if there are any other Mage Association members adding fuel to the fire. As for the secret plan, if the rat catcher outbreak escalates, we'll have a suitable method to deal with it. This way, we won't have to worry about dealing with those rat catchers when we're preparing to deal with the other factions." 2 plans. The Tiefling Mage Association member nodded and spoke with a tone of approval. 2 plans are always better than 1. I think we can carry them out. Everyone, I agree with Counselor Eelline's idea. Now, let's begin voting. After the Tiefling Mage Association member expressed his opinion, all the backbones of the Mage Association members' faction raised their right hands. Right after that, 3 counselors from the Lost Ones faction also agreed. On the contrary, only 2 members of the God Agnosticism faction that the eel-lined monster belonged to raised their hands in agreement. The shapeshifter who had been pushed out by the Tiefling Mage Association member was currently glaring angrily at the Tiefling Mage Association member. He was obviously quite displeased. However, since the vote had already been passed, individual opinions were no longer important, unless Turns personally vetoed the decision. According to the rules of the Gods, Not Gods Association, all faction members would have to unconditionally obey the Tiefling Mage Association's decision. If anyone dared to go against the Tiefling Mage Association's decision, or if they pretended to comply but secretly disobeyed, the Gods Not Gods Association would hunt them down until they died. Every time I see that shapeshifter's ugly face, I feel like vomiting. It's just that this time, it's quite interesting to see him so angry that he's deformed. Haha. The tiefling mage was secretly delighted to see that his decision had been passed. This time, not only had he shocked everyone, he had also shown off his ability in front of all the backbones of the Mage Association. At the same time, he had also taken advantage of the shapeshifter who had a grudge against him. The key part was that the shapeshifter had no choice but to admit defeat. It was no wonder that the tiefling mage felt so delighted. Chapter 600. After the vote was completed, the high-level meeting of the Gods and Not Gods Association was dismissed. The 12 faction backbones left one after another. They still needed to prepare some of their own affairs. Since he was the first executor, after leaving the meeting hall, the shape-shifting monster directly walked into his own exclusive secret passage and rushed from the broken temple in the lower city to the big market to buy. When he walked out of the secret passage, his appearance had changed. The clothes on his body also changed from the robe he wore during the meeting to a light blue silk shirt with a tight-fitting dress on the outside. He walked a few steps and came to the door of the Civic Entertainment Hall. Then he called for a sedan for himself and said to the sedan bearers, "Go to Pasha Restaurant. Take a shortcut." 2 poisonous pincers flew out of his hands and accurately fell into the hands of the 2 winged apes who were carrying the sedan. After receiving the fare, the winged sedan bearers worked hard to lift the sedan into the sky and quickly rushed to the central city where the big market was located without any detours. The shape-shifting monster got off the sedan and walked directly into the restaurant. This was his own business. Seeing the boss enter, naturally there were people who came to greet him. "Boss, are you here to check the accounts or to eat?" Steamed eel, braised eel, braised eel, braised eel, braised eel, grilled eel, eel dumplings, eel broth, and also a fish slices that are as thin as possible. The raw material is eel. The shape-shifting monster in human form pulled over the waiter in the restaurant and ordered a table of eel-related dishes with a loud roar. Not only was the waiter scared, but it also made people wonder if he had been overworked recently and needed to eat so many eels to make up for it. Sitting in his own private room, the shape-shifting monster didn't use any cutlery. He used his hands to quickly destroy all kinds of food related to the eels in front of him, as if this could relieve the anger in his heart. Of course, this was just him comforting himself. After all, an eel-line monster was an eel-line monster. Although it looked similar to an eel, it wasn't a real eel. "Damn you. Sooner or later, I will put you on the table." While wolfing down the food, the shape-shifting monster secretly swore. As a kind of monster, this kind of creature had a moral concept that went against the natural creatures. To them, some of their actions were not truly evil, but in the eyes of other creatures, they were sinful beyond compare. In the past, there were spellcasters who were extremely curious and conducted special research on the strange creatures. Some even compiled a book of eternal exile to record the results of their research. However, as their research deepened, more and more spellcasters discovered that it was actually very dangerous to explore advanced creatures such as Beholder or Mind Flayers. Much of the forbidden knowledge contained in their minds was inextricably linked to some of the outer gods known as ancient evils. If there was even the slightest mistake, the researcher would be doomed eternally. One of the most famous cases for some of the most powerful spellcasters was none other than the fate of the most talented Grand Arcanist of Netheril, Elam. The subject of his research was the Mind Flayers. This Grand Arcanist discovered that the origin of this race did not come from the past but the future. Then, Elam was distorted by unpredictable forces and then permanently turned from a human into a Mind Flayers. Although with his extraordinary wisdom, this Grand Arcanist used the Lich promotion ritual to get rid of the control by turning into an undead creature. His personality and essence were still contaminated. From this, it could be seen how dangerous it was to study advanced creatures. But fortunately, the shapeshifters were not advanced creatures. Although they were not natural creatures, They had nothing to do with the terrifying ancient evils. They were just byproducts accidentally produced by an experiment when the ancient wizards were exploring the mysteries of magic. Many books had sufficient introductions and explanations about shapeshifters. The reason why they were called shapeshifters was that these creatures could transform into medium-sized humanoid creatures at will. Although their true appearance was not good-looking, they were not as disgusting as other monsters. They looked like grayish-white humanoid creatures that had not yet fully developed. They had slender heads, skinny limbs, and sinister, noseless faces. Shapeshifters had no hair, and if observed closely, their skin had a jelly-like luster. Shapeshifters liked to infiltrate society to gather wealth and influence instead of building their own cities. Young shapeshifters would infiltrate goblin or orc tribes to practice their shape-shifting skills. When they were proficient, they would go to elves, dwarves, and other more complicated societies to take up their posts. Instead of becoming leaders and attracting attention, shapeshifters actually preferred to be manipulators behind the scenes, or use multiple identities to manipulate influential citizens or even entire guilds. Shapeshifters were greedy and selfish, and at the same time, they would spend their whole lives indulging in pleasure. When they matured, the most common way to infiltrate was to first become a servant in a rich family and observe their master's words and actions for a long time. When they were sure that they could perfectly imitate the master's words and actions, shapeshifters would replace them. If there was a beautiful mistress or other female member in the family, shapeshifters would never reject the desire to cross species. In fact, this was how they reproduced. Shapeshifters could give birth to offspring with human or other humanoid creatures. Because they were lazy, they would leave after the other party was pregnant. When the other party gave birth to children, they would all be shapeshifters. When they grew up, they would naturally awaken the shape-shifting talent of shapeshifters and then repeat the shape-shifting's life. Some particularly sinister shapeshifters, in order to achieve a morbid desire for possession, would even destroy the relationship by impersonating an unfaithful partner. Therefore, except for some guys with weird hobbies, no one would like shapeshifters. In the material plane, there are figures of such monsters in many cities. However, once they were discovered, they were usually tied to the stake and burned alive. Only a few shapeshifters with more powerful talents could stay in the same city for a long time without being discovered. They either had an extra profession level or their mimicry ability was so strong that they could not only imitate the appearance, but also the talent and skills of the target. The shape-shifting backbone of the Gods Association was the latter. The reason why he joined the Gods Association was actually because his evil deeds of replacing a god's priest in a material plane were exposed, so he had no choice but to be hunted down by the God's Church. Even after he hid in the Sigil City, he still did not restrain his actions. Using this method of replacing, the shapeshifters had seized the wealth of many country merchants, and this Pasha restaurant was one of his trophies. Chapter 601. If you walk too much at night, you will eventually encounter a ghost. The shape-shifting monster relied on his service to the Gods Not Gods Guild to wantonly replace many rich businessmen. He took those people's property, wealth, and even wives for himself without any scruples. Although his targets were all dull and country bumpkins, this still violated some people's taboo. Among them was the eel-line monster in the same association as him. The shape-shifting monster used some underhanded means to get a seafood stall into his hands. Because he felt that the profits of the products sold there were too low, he changed the original product catalog without permission. But he didn't know that the reason why the seafood stall sold some fish intestine soup that almost no one bought was actually because of the need of the eel-line monster. That was the cafeteria of the eel-line monster clan. If they wanted to eat delicious food suitable for themselves in Sigil City, all the eel-line monsters had to go to this seafood stall. The original owner of this stall, the water elemental descendant, actually had a deep friendship with the eel-line monsters. After the right to enjoy delicious food was taken away, as the chief of the clan, the eel-line monster backbone of the Gods Not Gods Guild immediately came to visit. Unsurprisingly, The shape-shifting monster's disguise was seen through by the eel-lined monster chief. He found part of his old friend's limbs in a box in the corner of the cold room, and the rest of the body parts had all entered the shape-shifting monster's stomach. If President Barnes hadn't intervened at that time, the angry eel-line monsters would have almost fed the shape-shifting monster to the giant eel as bait. From then on, the eel-line monster backbone was always looking for opportunities to target the shape-shifting monster, causing the shape-shifting monster to suffer losses. This time, facing the rat infestation was no exception. The eel-line monster's proposal was reasonable and well-founded, so it was quickly adopted and implemented. But when he proposed the proposal, he deliberately didn't mention that the shape-shifting monster should withdraw the budget from the association before purchasing. In fact, the other backbone of the association didn't realize this. They generally thought that buying some rat poison and rat traps didn't cost much at all. However, the shape-shifting monster, as the first executor, received the data. Based on the current situation of the rat infestation, even if he received a group purchase discount from the Rat Catchers Association after the reward was issued, if he wanted to buy enough rat poison and rat traps, he would have to spend at least 1,000 gold coins or 200 platinum coins out of his own pocket. Moreover, if he was greedy for this bargain, then it would actually go against the eel-string monster's suggestion of secretly buying from the big market, and he might even be punished later. If he went to the big market to buy these things, the price would be conservatively estimated to double. Then, he would really have to bleed. No, I have to check the market first. Sitting in the private room, the shape-shifting monster picked his teeth and thought to himself, I can't go to the Rat Catcher Guild to post a reward first. Otherwise, if those mercenary merchants receive the news, they would probably raise the price of rat poison and rat traps immediately. When that time comes, I'll really want to cry, but have no tears. Thinking of this, the shape-shifting monster hurriedly walked out of the private room and took out more than 100 platinum coins from Pasha Restaurant's accounting room. He calculated that if he saw a potion and rat trap at a suitable price, he must quickly buy it. In order to get some discounts when negotiating the price, he put on a slightly tattered old dress and turned into the image of an old man with white hair and a beard. After finishing these preparations, the shape-shifting monster hurriedly left his restaurant. After staying in Sigil City for a few years, he still had some understanding of the shops in the big market area. Therefore, the first pharmacy that the shape-shifting monster visited was the Thousand Herbs Cup in the big market. This pharmacy was usually known for its comprehensive products and cheap prices. Hey, crazy sheep, are you busy? Stepping into the door of the Thousand Herbs Cup, the shape-shifting monster pretended to be familiar with the place and greeted Woolly Thousand Herbs Cup. He pretended to be a member of the Sensory Association, and that person had some friendship with Woolly Thousand Herbs Cup. Sure enough, not long after he greeted, a head with horns on his head poked out from behind the counter. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, the half-goat owner looked at the shape-shifting monster a few times, then suddenly sniffed and responded, I thought you couldn't eat fish? Why do you have such a strong fishy smell? And it's the smell of eel. You're not Sonder. You don't have the smell of tobacco that he often smokes. I quit smoking. The shape-shifting monster covered up. That's strange, Woolly Thousand Herbs Cup muttered. But because he had just tried a new type of potion, his mind was still not clear, so he didn't carefully think about the other party's loopholes. What do you want? Is it still the mint-flavored tobacco dip? I said, I've quit smoking. The shape-shifting monster explained again helplessly. He didn't want to talk too much with crazy sheep, so he bluntly stated his needs. I want to buy some potions to kill rats. Herds are fine too. Also, my house is currently infested with rats, and I have to go to the Rat Catchers Guild later. Can you get me some more rat poison potions? So you want to buy rat poison? You should have said so earlier. Woolly Thousand Herbs Cup spat out a mouthful of saliva, then rubbed his swollen temples, and then said to the shape-shifting monster, Angelica root juice, toad skin bitten by fire ants, red letterstone powder, and mixed with dried sparrow brain fragments will do. This kind of wonderful combination of rat poison, you can only buy it from Thousand Herbs Cup. Since you're an old acquaintance, I'll charge you 5 poison claws for each potion. I guarantee that all the rats that are causing trouble in your house will die. When he finished saying the price, the shape-shifting monster couldn't help but spit a mouthful of thick phlegm on his face. This was only the price of one potion, and according to what he said, after grinding it into powder and feeding it to rats, at most 1 or 2 rats would be able to eat it. But right now, outside the broken temple, there were thousands or tens of thousands of rats. If he followed Woolly Thousand Herbs Cup's formula, even if the shape-shifting monster was willing to give up all his wealth, he probably wouldn't be able to get enough potions. My house is infested with rats. There's so many rats that I can't walk. You have to give me some cheap rat poison that can kill a large number of rats. The shape-shifting monster emphasized again, but the other party still fluttered his long eyelashes and said to him in confusion, "This is a cheap and effective medicine. I've eaten it before. The taste is terrible. If you treat it as a snack, you can eat it for several days." The shape-shifting monster's face twitched twice, almost revealing his original form. He finally understood why the Thousand Grass Cup was called the Mad Sheep. Chapter 602. Walking out of the Thousand Herb Cup shop, the shapeshifter began to curse loudly, which attracted the attention of many passers-by. He cursed until his blood pressure dropped a little. Then he began to think again about where he should go to buy cheap and effective rat medicine. The market area of Sigil City was too large. If he did not have a target, he might not be able to find a suitable shop in a day. It's all the fault of that guy who ate the rat poison and lost his mind. It's all that eel demon's fault. The shapeshifter cursed silently in his heart. I haven't found a suitable seller yet, and now I have to spend a lot of money on those greedy informers. But given the current situation, this was indeed the only way he could go. So, the shapeshifter walked to the intersection of the street and waved his hand vaguely. Not long after, 2 to 3 bare-chested dwarves came to his side and greeted him. "Dear sir, the honest Oak Barrel family greets you. May I know if you need a guide, or do you have any other needs?" Because the shapeshifter's actions were very professional, the informers did not treat him as an idiot. They did not try to do free business, nor did they try to use words that would only be used to cheat. Just like when they faced every strong bird, they first accurately reported their advantageous service content, and then asked if they could satisfy the other party's needs. I need to find a potion shop. The quality of the product must be guaranteed, and the price can't be too expensive. Also, the shapeshifter paused and glanced back at the Thousand Herb Cup shop. The shop owner must be someone who can keep a clear head. Don't go crazy there, because I have a big business to do with him. After listening to his words, the dwarves gathered together and whispered for a long time. Even though the shapeshifter had found someone to cast a glib tongue spell on him, he still did not understand the conversation that included the native language, the dwarven dialect, and various metaphors. But it did not matter, because these informers finally gave him a clear result. There's a new potion shop, and the owner is a relative of the Thousand Herb Cup. He is at least good at making antidotes. Otherwise, he would not have been able to survive the apprenticeship period in Mad Sheep Shop. His shop had just been set up, so he should still be in the process of opening for business and soliciting customers. That shop should be able to satisfy your needs. Take me there. The shapeshifter did not say anything else. He did not even bother to take out his pockets. It was best not to reveal the location of his wallet and sigil. He simply handed the dwarves a handful of poisonous pincers, just enough for each of them to get one. After receiving the information fee, the informant whispered a few more words. Then a dwarf came over and motioned for the shapeshifters to follow behind him. Under the guidance of this temporary guide, the shape-shifting monster walked through more than 10 streets and finally saw a brand new tall building. For this reason, he paid another 3 poisonous pincers as the fee for hiring the other party to lead the way. Enjoy your shopping. The shape-shifting monster ignored Bao Qi and walked straight into the shop. From the dwarves, he learned that the owner of this shop was once an apprentice of Woolly Thousand Herb Cup. But when he stepped through the door, he found that this shop was simply the opposite of the Mad Sheep shop. All the furnishings were very simple. The bright marble floor shone brightly, and there was a gorgeous chandelier hanging from the ceiling. I hope he is still in the process of opening for business. Although he was very satisfied with the furnishings, The shapeshifter knew the proverb, "Wool comes from the sheep's back." The decorations were so luxurious that the prices of the goods here would not be too shabby. When he saw Puwu standing in front of a row of potion cabinets, he asked from afar, "How much is the rat medicine here?" "Welcome." Seeing the guest, Puwu immediately greeted him warmly. "How much rat medicine do you need?" "If it is a small-scale extermination, we have bait to lure the rats into the trap. It is much more cost-effective than buying rat medicine. If there is a rat disaster at home and you need to clean up a large number of pests, we also have a better choice than rat medicine. There is indeed a rat disaster at home. I need to buy a potion that can effectively kill the rats. If your price is suitable, I will give you a big deal." As he spoke, the shapeshifter walked to the counter where Puwu was standing. Just like before, he took out a platinum coin without rummaging through his pocket and pushed it in front of Puwu. Puwu immediately showed an even brighter smile. He did not say much. He just ran to the back of the cabinet and took out a box decorated with silk cloth. He placed it in front of the shapeshifter and opened it. The box was filled with sandalwood, and a refreshing fragrance slowly drifted out from it. The shapeshifter was very suspicious of Puwu's action. He could not help but take 2 steps back and immediately covered his mouth and nose. "Don't worry. This is the core area of the big market. The Brotherhood of Orders Patrol route passes by my shop." As a strong bird who grew up in Sigil City, Puwu naturally knew what the shapeshifter was worried about. At the same time, he also knew how to dispel the other party's concerns. "These sandalwood are my solution. Using them can eliminate the rat disaster on a large scale." Immediately after, Puwu patiently explained the function of the sandalwood to the shapeshifter. It turned out that the sandalwood was a type of incense that was completely tanned with herbs. After it was ignited, the smoke emitted would be more intense. It also had the effect of attracting scavenger insects and wolf roaches. Those 2 creatures were the natural enemies of sewer rats and skullcap rats. As long as they met, they would kill each other. They would not rest until one of them was dead. Using living creatures to fight living creatures, the green natural and pollution-free extermination of those pests. "You only need to buy a box of sandalwood," Puwu said with a smile. "And this box of sandalwood only costs 20 platinum coins. Each sandalwood can be lit for half an hourglass. During this time, scavenger insects and wolf roaches will be attracted one after another. You only need to carry your valuables with you and leave the rest of the problem to the natural enemies of the rats. The only thing you need to be careful of is not to light too much sandalwood. Otherwise, it will attract too many of those 2 types of insects." After listening to Puwu's introduction, the shapeshifter looked at the box of sandalwood and took out one from it. "I need to test their effects first." The platinum coin was flicked into the box. Then, he turned his head and walked to the door of Thousand Herb Hall. Chapter 603. Cautious but a little petty customer. Keys walked over from behind the counter and gently closed the sandalwood box in the half-goat's hand. "But I believe he will come back, and I have a feeling that he will be a big customer." Picky customers were not the best customers, but they were the ones who were willing to spend money on good products. In fact, Puwu's words had already convinced the shape-shifting monster. He was indeed interested in the sandalwood box, so he wanted to test its quality. He already had a draft of a suitable place to test the product's performance, and it was on the way. After leaving the Thousand Herb Hall, the shape-shifting monster walked directly into an alley. When he came out again, he was wearing the standard robe of the gods. He called for a palanquin, and the bearers were still of the winged race. Under the shoulders of 2 swans, the shape-shifting monster quickly arrived at his destination, the Rat Catchers Guild, which was located in the city's Secretary District. In Sigil City, the Ladies' District was perhaps the most powerful and prestigious district in the city. But the people who lived in the Secretary District proudly claimed that it was their district that kept the city running. This district belonged to the bureaucrats, scribes, scholars, and those professional guilds. Here, all the people and things were like clockwork, and all the activities had to be done according to the established rules. In fact, those claims were not far from the truth. This district had the Hall of Records and the Hall of Speakers, which are the necessary contracts and mouthpieces of the city's daily life. Without them, the city had no laws, no evidence of property rights, no records of debts, no arrest records, and no taxes. The people in the Secretary District liked to work hard in order to maintain normality. There were constant patrols on the streets, and there were always people taking care of the buildings. It was not like the Ladies' District, and it was not as dangerous as the violent and noisy Lair District. Travelers from the lower plane did not often come here, but on the contrary, bumpkins from a material plane and creatures from the upper plane liked to visit here. In the Clerk's District, the most common people included people in the financial industry, importers of rare goods, middlemen of various forces and various dimensions, staff members of various large service guilds, and clerks who could write and write in several languages. The Rat Catchers Guild that the shapeshifters were looking for was also located in the Secretary District. However, due to the lack of resources, reputation, wealth, and so on, this guild was unable to be like those large professional guilds and have their own office building. They could only share a hall with other small guilds to handle their business. However, just like the Secretary's District, they would try their best to whitewash their facades. Welcome to the Guild Meeting Hall. You can find more than 18 professional guilds in one go here, and you don't have to walk through the streets one by one. There are convenient and efficient services, as well as many professionals at your service. I'm your clerk, Spelly. I'm at your service. A well-dressed female cat person walked over to sell her services after the shapeshifters entered the hall. Then, the shapeshifter, who hid himself in the hooded robe, didn't care about such a warm service. Listen, kitten, if your eyes weren't searching for the location of my wallet when you were speaking, then your words would be more convincing. But since I do have some needs right now, I'll overlook those offenses. I'm looking for the Rat Catchers Guild. Please lead the way. After saying these words, he stretched his sleeve forward, revealing the insignia of the Gods Guild on the inside of his sleeve. After seeing the insignia, the cat person clerk, Spelly, immediately shut her mouth wisely, and then turned her body slightly to point the way for the shapeshifter. They found the Rat Catchers Guild in the corner of the hall. Although this guild didn't sound very powerful, because catching rats was indeed a very important daily municipal work in Sigil City, the Rat Catchers Guild still occupied a separate compartment in the hall. Spelly's guidance ended here. She only recorded her name on the guild's sign-in list, so that if the shapeshifters did business with the Rat Catchers Guild, she would receive a small commission. After doing this, she turned around and left. Welcome. The Rat Catchers Guild has the most professional rat catching service, and it will definitely meet your needs. Walking into the compartment of the Rat Catchers Guild, the guild clerk who stayed here was a cat person with an owl head. He greeted the shapeshifter with a bird-like voice. From the home rat extermination service that costs 1 calamity coin to the rat death formation that costs 50 platinum coins, our guild always has a service that can meet your needs. The Broken Temple is suffering from a rat infestation. The shapeshifter didn't want to listen to his nagging, so he directly interrupted his business introduction. I'm now representing the Gods Guild to give a reward to your guild. Solve the rat infestation caused by the skullcap rats, and you can get a reward of 200 platinum coins. If you completely solve the group consciousness of the skullcap rats, then the reward will be doubled. Hearing that there was a big business, the cat person clerk immediately rummaged through the cabinets and found a standard magic contract. Then he spread it out and wrote down the customer's request. He pushed the contract in front of the shapeshifter and didn't continue to speak. The shapeshifter, who was familiar with the various rules of Sigil City, twisted the ring on his hand and then put it on the parchment with the magic contract written on it. The lines that seemed to have been burned by fire spread on the parchment and soon formed a coat of arms of the Gods Guild. After confirming that every line was accurate, the cat person clerk breathed a sigh of relief. Sir, I'll immediately submit this bounty mission in the guild announcement. However, according to your mission requirements and the difficulty of the mission, your guild needs to pay at least half of the reward in advance. With a clang, a bag sewn with calfskin was thrown in front of the cat person by the shapeshifter. There are 100 platinum coins in it. After paying the advance, He began to wander in the compartment, as if he was admiring the display of the Rat Catchers Guild. On the rows of teak shelves painted pure white, there were many rat-catching props. Rat sticky boards, trap cages, rat traps, fake sausages, and so on. In addition, there were some formalin jars with various rat organs. In the corner of this compartment, there were several cages with live rats and single skullcap rats, and there were constant chirping sounds coming from them. It looks very professional. Chapter 604. While admiring the professionalism of the Rat Catchers Guild, a small piece of burning sandalwood suddenly fell from the sleeve of the shapeshifter's robe. He gently tossed the sandalwood to the corner of the cubicle without attracting the attention of the shapeshifter clerk. After doing this, the shapeshifter walked out of the cubicle and returned to the office hall again. Every time he walked a distance, he would repeat the same action. When he reached the door of the office hall, the sandalwood he bought with a platinum coin was broken into a dozen pieces and scattered in every corner of the hall. After burning, the sandalwood emitted a faint smell, but it was covered by the body odor of various creatures coming and going in the office hall, so no one took it seriously. And the smoke did not float up. Instead, it drilled into the sewer along the corner. "Sir, what else do you—" Seeing the shapeshifter hesitating at the door of the hall, the cat-person clerk named Spelly came over again, wanting to see if she could get other business. However, before she finished speaking, chaos suddenly occurred. "Why are there so many scavengers? There are werewolves here. Oh hell, it's biting my toes. Help! These guys are eating scrolls." Screams suddenly came from all corners of the office hall. There were scavenging insects that had the body of a sludge monster, but had the beak of a parrot. There were also werewolves that were the size of jackals, but had the body of a cockroach that was much larger than the head of a wolf on its neck. They seemed to have gone mad as they broke through the grate of the manhole and swarmed into the office. Some of these insects broke through the cubicles of the Rat Catchers Guild and dragged out the cages with live rats and rats. They put them in the hall to share with their own kind and eat together. Some insects that did not get food turned their attention to other creatures in the hall. They also treated some of the rat people as prey and launched fierce attacks on them. Fortunately, the Bug Exterminator Guild was also located in the office hall. With the help of professionals, the scavengers and werewolves were either tamed or driven back to the sewer. In the end, only a few unlucky rat people clerks suffered. The other customers and clerks only had their clothes and documents damaged, but they did not suffer serious physical injuries. Just as everyone began to investigate the cause of the accident, the mutated monster had already left the office. After changing his attire in the alley, he walked to the entrance of the Citizens' Pleasure Hall and called for the sedan bearers who were waiting for work to return to the market. The effect is barely acceptable. After walking through the door of the 10,000 Herb Hall, the shape-shifting monster saw the half-goat Pooh Woo standing behind the counter and immediately spoke. Because he wanted to purchase a large batch of sandalwood, this guy had a little trick up his sleeve. He tried to use words to suppress the price. However, Pooh Woo ignored him. He just smiled and pointed to the wall beside him. There was a bulletin board hanging on the wall. Price adjustment notice. Due to the shortage of raw materials, the retail price of rodent sandalwood has been increased by 3 times. The shape-shifting monster read the notice, and his face turned green. He couldn't help but threaten. "You brat from the Mad Goat family. How dare you raise the price?" The smile on Pooh Woo's face disappeared without a trace when he heard someone call him the kid of the Mad Goat family. He slammed his hand on the counter, and the words on the bulletin board on the wall immediately changed with a bang. The number 3 became the number 4. Diseases come from the mouth, and disasters come from the mouth, but in the end, the wallet suffers. Pooh Woo was not as polite as the last time the shape-shifting monster visited. This time, he directly said, "Sir, you're probably not a resident of Sigil City. Otherwise, why don't you know that those informers and lamplighters are actually much faster than the sedan bearers?" As soon as these words came out, the shape-shifting monster's eyelids quickly blinked. This was a physical reaction when he panicked. A dagger appeared in the palm behind his back, and he began to move toward the counter as if nothing had happened. If you think I'm a dummy? Pu-Wu gently pressed on the counter, and a transparent shield suddenly fell from the ceiling, separating him from the shape-shifting monster. I usually don't use that word, but if you want to use a knife and show off here, in a shop on the Joint Patrol route of the Brotherhood of Order and the Diehards, then I can only admit that you're definitely a dummy among dummies. Looking at the other party's pale face, Pu-Wu continued, I heard from some well-informed people that you just went to the guild office in the Secretary District. You stayed at the Rat Catchers Guild there for a while, and then the guild put up a public bounty. Immediately after that, many scavenger bugs and werewolves suddenly appeared in the office hall. Thinking about the things you bought from me before, plus the words you revealed about testing the product, I have sufficient reason to suspect that you're related to the bug attack in the guild office hall. Pu-Wu continued to pressure him. Although you're a god and not a core member of the Gods Guild, don't think too much about it. I only found out after seeing the bounty on the Rat Catcher Guild. But if you're captured by the Brotherhood of Order or the Diehards, you'll be handed over to the Merciful Extermination Society to deal with. If it's 1 to 3, I'm afraid that even if you're the illegitimate son of President Barnes, he'll give up on rescuing you without hesitation. Are you threatening me? Of course not. I'm just stating a possibility. Of course. Pu-Wu pressed on. If you become my customer, then out of consideration for business ethics, I have the responsibility to keep your secret, at least in this case. 80 platinum coins. I'll take that box of sandalwood. No. I'm afraid you'll have to look at the bulletin board again. The mutated monster turned his head slightly and saw that on the bulletin board on the wall, the number for had become the number 10 at some point. In the end, after paying a total of 200 platinum coins, for this, the mutated monster, who did not have that much cash on hand, even threw in a magic ring and a talisman. He finally bought the sandalwood that originally only cost 20 platinum coins. This was already double his previous budget, but in order to buy Pu-Wu's business ethics, he could only pinch his nose and accept it. When he returned to Pasha's Tavern, the mutated monster did the same thing as before when he ordered a table of eel dishes. As if to vent his anger, he ordered a table of lamb and ate it angrily for a long time. Chapter 605. After ruthlessly slaughtering the shape-shifting monster, Pu-Wu counted the platinum coins in his hand, and the smile on his face did not disappear. Hey, buddy, you're born to be a businessman. According to the words you taught me, the shape-shifting monster really paid a big price this time. Keys, who had just returned from a tour of the market, did not think much of the half-goat's praise. It's not just once. That guy will return to the Thousand Herb Hall and continue to take out his wallet to pay the bill. What we have to do is wait until we squeeze out every poisonous pincer hidden in his body. That's what we'll do, Pu-Wu replied with a smile. And I'm happy to do that. After all, I hate him too. The two black-hearted businessmen, who were far more sinister than the shape-shifting monster, quickly reached a consensus. Long before coming to the sigil, Keys had already designed a way to contact the gods and non-gods. Rather than personally going to the association to get the letter, it was better to let them come to him. So on the day the Thousand Herb Hall was built, he began to discharge smoke into the sewers to stimulate the rats to rush to the broken temple. Then, he waited for the shape-shifting monster to buy rat medicine for the gods and non-gods, and sold him sandalwood that could kill rats by biological means. Those guys only needed to ignite a box of sandalwood to attract a large number of scavengers and weasels. Of course, this could solve the rat problem, but at the same time, it would also trigger a new pest problem. At that time, they would have to come back to look for drugs that could kill the insects. What was the best business? The best business was to create a problem, demand, and then provide a solution, product, to the problem. This was the valuable wisdom that Keys's experience in his previous life had given him. The loan sharks were all advocating the concept of consumption upgrading. The bosses who controlled the sugar trade were all investing in pharmaceutical companies that produced insulin. Only by doing this could their business become sustainable. Compared to monopolies and the so-called no-cost business, sustainable business was the most advanced concept. And compared to the methods of the bosses behind the scenes in his previous life, Keys's method was more effective and direct. Gods were not gods. After experiencing rat infestation, they would also experience insect infestation. After experiencing insect infestation, they might also experience bird infestation. After bird infestation, they might also experience snake infestation. The cycle was endless. Although this was a world with spells, supernatural abilities, and various gods, gods who were not gods could not be relied on. The basic law of the development of things would not change. Things, objects, would always develop, move in the direction that would be least obstructed. Due to cost considerations, they could only brace themselves and come to 10,000 Herbs Hall again and again to be slaughtered by Keys and Poo Woo. There is no doubt that some of them will have other ideas. They may want to solve all the problems once and for all. But at that time, it would be the best opportunity for Keys to display his strength. Furthermore, due to the restrictions of the Lady of Pain and Sigil City and the Dabbas under her command, as well as the fact that the gods weren't lunatics like the Gods Guild or the Chaos Guild, there was a limit to how much force they could use. When they realized that force could not achieve their goal, then communication would become the only way to solve the problem. At that time, Keys could naturally obtain the information he wanted from them. This was much more cost-effective than directly buying it with money. At the same time, he could also obtain more detailed and accurate information. So for Keys, there was only one thing he needed to consider at this time, and that was how to speed up the process. After all, if things were dragged on for too long, there would be a lot of unnecessary time costs. Is there something added to the sandalwood? Of course, other than the one that was bought by the shape-shifting monster, the other sandalwood was added with needlegrass powder that can attract the earth golem. After burning, it will produce a smell similar to the pheromone emitted by the earth golem during its mating season. They will definitely come in groups, but they will sadly find that there is no earth golem present. Those monsters will most likely attack all living things indiscriminately. There is also a small possibility that they will hollow out the foundation of the broken temple to seek revenge. The demigod's answer was exactly what Keys needed. The two of them were like black-hearted merchants who had planned a scam, laughing heartily. Ha ha, Poo Woo, you have to quickly prepare. Who knows, the shape-shifting monster might come to you tomorrow to buy the insecticide. Unlike Keys and Poo Woo who were calculating their future profits, the shape-shifting monster felt terrible. Even though he had eaten plate after plate of roasted lamb hearts, he still felt a bit of heartache. I will definitely make that guy pay. But that was a matter for the future. Right now, he had to hurry back to the headquarters of the Broken Temple because there were more and more rats gathering there. Under the organization of rats, they had even begun to break through the blockade of the guards. Although the shape-shifting monster would feel his teeth itch whenever he thought of Poo Woo, he had already tested the sandalwood and was very confident in its biological rodent extermination effect. So when he returned to the headquarters, he immediately lit a sandalwood stick and threw it into the rat horde. Before the green smoke dissipated, a large number of scavengers and weasels ran out of nowhere. As the natural enemies of rats and rats, these insects launched a ferocious attack the moment they appeared. Previously, when he was in the guild hall, the shape-shifting monster did not have time to observe carefully because the situation was under control in time. Now he finally understood why these insects were called the natural enemies of rats. The stomachs of the scavengers were like bottomless pits. No matter how many rats they ate, they would not slow down their eating speed. If they really could not eat anymore, they would even split on the spot, with their abdomen as the center. The part without a head would grow a new head, and the part without a tail would grow a new tail. Then they would repeat their previous actions, their bodies rapidly growing and splitting again. As for the weasels, although these insects did not have the digestive system of scavengers and the ability to split and grow, they had the temperament of jackals and wolves. After their stomachs were full, they would stop eating, but they would still bite any rats they encountered to death, as if they were killing for the sake of killing. Quick, distribute these sandalwood sticks. After witnessing the effects of the sandalwood up close, the shape-shifting monster did not hesitate and immediately distributed a box of sandalwood to the guards. Everyone take a piece and surround the defensive line. After a certain distance, light them up and throw some out. In an instant, many wisps of green smoke rose in spirals around the broken temple. The rat horde began to fall into chaos. Chapter 606. There are strange movements around the broken temple. The lower city is in big trouble now. The gods are not the Gods Association. After the shape-shifting monster brought the box of sandalwood back to the broken temple and used it, the information network in Sigil City became extremely active. All kinds of news about what happened there and about the bug rat people came one after another, and they were updated all the time. Because there was too much news of this and that, it was difficult for ordinary people to distinguish the truth from the falsehood, like those large organizations. At the same time, they sent specialized personnel to investigate the site. Therefore, all kinds of rumors were mixed with the real information and began to spread widely. After half a day of fermentation, the news had even spread outside of Sigil City and alarmed President Barnes, who was in the Astral Fortress. Because of the problems in the headquarters, the gods were not the Gods Association had to temporarily leave the battlefield and go home to check. This is your rat extermination plan. After gathering all the remaining counselors, Barnes first patiently listened to everyone's report. Then he could no longer hold back his anger and cursed out loud. In a fit of rage, he swung the fine gold lamp stick in his hand and smashed the marble conference table in front of him into pieces. Shape-shifting monster, explain to me. Barnes stared at the initiator of all this with a malicious gaze and asked directly, "Why did the rat medicine you bought, that is, the broken sandalwood, as if it had detonated a bug nest and attracted so many scavengers and wolf cockroaches?" The skeletal eel monster sitting in his seat said in a timely manner, and many earth monsters appeared. Barnes glanced at the eel monster. Although he suspected that this guy who did not get along well with the shape-shifting monster was behind the incident, considering that the current situation had exceeded expectations, the eel monster should not have the guts to take revenge on the shape-shifting monster by harming the interests of the association. Therefore, he only temporarily ignored the eel monster's instigation. After all, what that guy said was true. "Sir Barnes, I'm really loyal to you." The shapeshifter knelt on the ground with a plop and replied in a mournful voice, "In order to buy that box of rodent-killing sandalwood, I paid more than 200 platinum coins for the association. Furthermore, before using it, I have experimented with it in the secretary's office hall. After lighting up a stick of sandalwood, it did attract some insects. They can effectively clean up those rats and rats. Furthermore, I can guarantee that the number of insects attracted by a stick of sandalwood is completely controllable." Seeing the shape-shifting monster's servile appearance, almost all of the counselors present felt disdain. It should be noted that even if they were fearful of the chairman's strength, the reason why they joined the Association of Gods and Non-Gods was because they agreed with the association's three core ideals: to prove the falsity of gods, to reduce or even eliminate the power of gods, and to tear apart the veil of the unknown to see the truth. They definitely did not think of themselves as Thean slaves, and on this point, even the eel-line monsters were more principled than the shapeshifters. However, other people might be disdainful, but the way the shapeshifters did it was indeed very smart. From the very beginning, he had made his stand clear and stood firmly behind Barnes. Therefore, although the chairman of the Association of Gods and Non-Gods was furious that the shapeshifter messed up the matter, he did not immediately punish the shapeshifter cruelly. He pulled the kneeling shapeshifter in front of him and said, "Then tell me, why did the insects go out of control after lighting up a box of sandalwood? Why did the insects not leave even after the incense was extinguished? Oh, by the way, other than the lycanthropes and scavenger, why were the earth trolls also attracted?" The shapeshifter could not answer the chairman's three questions in a row. He could only blame all the problems on the half-goat who sold him the sandalwood. Although that was not actually wrong. In an attempt to divert Barnes's anger, he said, "Sir, I think there's a problem with the pharmacist who sold the sandalwood. It said that he felt like the nephew of the mad goat. Although the effect of the product is amazing, there are always some strange after effects left behind. Then go look for him and solve this problem for me completely." I'll only give you 2 hourglasses. If the time limit is over. The adamantine lamp stick pressed on the shapeshifter's shoulder. Suddenly, a flame burst out from the cage and burned a big hole in the robe. With a sizzling sound and a painful wail from the shapeshifter, Barnes said viciously, "I'll twist your head off." After saying this, Barnes waved his hand and opened a portal. He then kicked the shapeshifter into it. The portal led directly to the periphery of the broken temple, which was now the battlefield of the insects and rats. So in fact, this could also be seen as a punishment for the shapeshifter. If the shapeshifter did not have the ability to escape from the battlefield, the death caused by the insects and rats would befall him. "These damn bastards, get out of my way." The shapeshifter kept cursing in his heart. The targets of his cursing included the insects and rats in front of him, as well as the eel-line monster, Poo the half-goat, and Barnes. "Sooner or later, I'll peel off your skin and pull out your heart and liver as a side dish." But cursing was just cursing. His fingers were not idle. The moment he was kicked out of the portal by Barnes, the shapeshifter activated an enchanted equipment on his body. An orange light lingered around his body. This was a magical aura produced by the charm of enchantment. It could prevent the surrounding animals from attacking the wearer of the charm. It was with this equipment that he could escape from the swarm of insects and rats. Walking out of the battlefield, covered by the corpses of insects and rats, the shapeshifter saw many unfamiliar faces around the block. He did not need to investigate to know that those people were either spies who came to seek valuable information to earn information fees or spies sent by the major organizations. He did not deal with these people. He quickly found a small alley and changed his appearance. When he sat on a palanquin again, he had transformed into a tiefling. "Palanquin, I'm going to the Baylor's Gray Nail Tavern in the Lair." "That's right. It's the tavern that Chemical ordered not to commit any crimes around. You'll get 4 times the fare, including the empty fare. Don't waste my breath. Let's go." This time, the shapeshifter did not transform into an ordinary tiefling. Instead, he transformed into a tiefling warlock that he had previously replaced. So when he spoke, he naturally used the charm person spell and used his words to seize the mind of the palanquin. This kind of behavior was not allowed. If the palanquin was discovered by the palanquin, he would probably be hunted down. But because the place they were going to was the most chaotic block in the lair, the bounty would probably never be issued. Chapter 607. After attending the memorial service in the Shiraba, Shemishaka returned to Sigil City full of energy. Compared to the inflexible, scorching inferno, she preferred the freer atmosphere of Gate City. This was because only in this place could she fully display her skills and display her talents. With the inheritance I inherited from cousin Maikue, I could buy a few more Devil Guard from the Tyrant Titan. Recently, that fat woman Panta seems to have lost her power, and the Doom Guardians don't seem to have stopped. Fiddling with the small wine cup in her hand and sipping the plum honey wine inside, Shimishaka pondered her next business plan. As a high-level Yugro's judgment demon, known for her wisdom and the biggest gangster in Sigil City, she enjoyed the feeling of having the Pearl of Wisdom in her hand. She was always one step ahead of others in formulating a perfect plan. This was her personal skill that she was most proud of. It was precisely because of this that she named her casino in the women's district Wheel of Fortune, implying that she was in control of fate. In addition to the Wheel of Fortune casino in the women's district, Shimishaka also had some other businesses. According to their different functions and service targets, she placed them in suitable areas. But one thing in common was that no crime was allowed on the streets where her businesses were located. Of course, the criminal activities prohibited by her were only those that were on the surface, the kind that could be used against others. If it could be done quietly, and in the end there would be no way to investigate, the person who carried out such a crime might even be rewarded and acknowledged by her. Therefore, after sending the shape-shifting monster to the Baylor's Gray Nail, the sedan bearers became missing persons. And at this time, Shimishaka happened to be in this tavern. In order to better serve her customers, she would not only work in the luxurious Wheel of Fortune casino, Every day, this female judgment fiend would spend a certain amount of time in each of her properties, and this period of time was usually fixed. Many competitors had attempted to assassinate her using this as a basis, but none had succeeded so far. This was because Shimashaka had many eyes and ears. Even the details, such as the shape-shifting monster, came from the broken temple, and it was originally wearing the clothes of a god, not a core member of the Gods Guild, had been interrogated by the sedan bearers before they were killed. The information was then reported to Shimashaka. Therefore, when the shapeshifter walked through the door of Baylor's Grey Nail and wanted to pass through the low-level gangsters in the lair who were shouting and drinking wantonly, a cold voice came directly from the railing on the second floor. "Isn't this the boss of Pasha's restaurant? Excuse me for not going out to meet you. Please come upstairs to talk." Hearing these words, the shape-shifting monster suddenly felt its heart skip a beat. As a shapeshifter, he naturally recognized that it was the unique language of the shapeshifters. In the Grey Nail of the Baylor, there was no doubt that the speaker was the famous plunderer Shimashaka, because that was the specialty of the Judgment Fiend. Suddenly receiving an invitation from the Queen of the Underworld, the shapeshifter could only follow her request and walked up the stairs. In a private room on the second floor of the tavern, he saw the vixen from the City of Civilization mark. Outside the room stood two green-skinned guards with V-shaped scales. They looked like strong gargoyles. Out of habit, the shapeshifter only glanced at Shimashaka once before committing her appearance to memory. She was indeed a high-level Yugoloth judgment demon, but unlike many of her kind who were obsessed with money and lacked aesthetic taste, Shimashaka was more like a tidy fox from a paradise, not a filthy jackal. Her spotless golden hair was soft and neat, and thin white stripes extended from the end of her long muzzle to the corner of her mouth. She wore a cobweb-like razor vine headdress on her head. Obviously, she wanted to imitate the intimidating queen of the city. She wanted her potential enemies to think twice before they tried to do anything that crossed the line. Of course, the Lady of Pain would never be like Shimashaka, who was covered in jewels. That would be a bit vulgar. She wore at least one ring on each finger, and some of them were purely decorations without enchantments. In order to match the jewels on her body, Shimashaka wore a silk robe given to her by an preceptor many years ago. From a distance, the robe was sapphire blue from top to bottom. However, the shapeshifter found that the robe was actually made of thousands of blue, green, and purple pearls. Although it seemed that only he and Shimashaka were in the private room, and there were only two guards outside, the shapeshifter still sensed that there was a medium-sized creature hiding under the spacious seat with his extraordinary senses. And he was sure that if he dared to make a move, at least a dozen henchmen would immediately appear. "It seems that you are in trouble. Otherwise, you would not have come to my tavern in the lair," Shimashaka said politely, but those who knew her well would know that this was just a common disguise. "As the boss of the Baylor's Grey Nail, I am actually very curious why a backbone of the association like you does not mobilize manpower from within. To be blunt, if you say that you think my assassins are better than the assassins of your association's anti-holy church, I will certainly not believe it." Shimashaka spoke in an elegant manner. Although her words were authoritative, they were not overbearing. The shapeshifter felt as if he was facing the royal family, but he did not feel that he was a larva under her feet. During the conversation, the underworld queen always had a smile on her face. She looked like an approachable Yugoloth, but she seemed to particularly like to use her elegant and slender fingers to tap on the table to emphasize her point of view. The shapeshifter did not know that her action was not unintentional. In fact, by tapping the table, Shimashaka had been sending orders to her henchmen. The henchmen quickly investigated everything about the shapeshifter according to the Judgment Fiend's instructions. Then, they used a magic item to transmit the information to one of Shimashaka's earrings in time. When it came to business, she was still used to anticipating the enemy's moves. Chapter 608. I just want to hire two thugs who are good at smashing up shops and won't be easily caught by the Brotherhood of Order. Faced with Shimashaka's seemingly omniscient style of conversation, the shapeshifter could not resist. He repeated his request and then remained silent. Seeing the shapeshifter's reaction, the underworld queen did not mind at all. She had already gotten the information she wanted, so there was no reason for her to turn down the offer. Of course, Shimashaka said softly. I'm happy to provide the best service to our esteemed guest. Following her words, the Nikaro's demon bodyguard outside the door pressed a certain mechanism, and then the mechanism under the booth was activated. Feeling a slight weightlessness, the shapeshifter realized that the booth was an elevator. He silently counted from 1 to 13 before the feeling of weightlessness disappeared. This way, please. Shimashaka got up first and led the shapeshifter. Welcome to my private wine cellar. Seeing that the shapeshifter was still a little hesitant, the underworld queen took the initiative to open the curtain and walked out of the booth. At this time, the shapeshifter finally saw what was outside. It was really a wine cellar. On both sides of the deep and dark corridor, there were many rows of oak barrels. As he followed Shimashaka into the depths of the corridor, the strong smell of plum wine rushed into his nose. Because he had once replaced some creatures in the Underdark, the shapeshifter had a certain degree of dark vision. Although there were no lights in this corridor, it was not difficult for him to walk. He followed the figure in front of him. He was not sure if it was Shimashaka. For a while, a faint light reappeared in the shapeshifter's eyes. It was a spacious round side room. A candle was lit in the middle of the room, but the diameter of the candle was as thick as a barrel, and the wick emitted a strange blue light. Welcome to Splendid Candle, my esteemed guest. Shimashaka's voice suddenly came from the end of the side room. The shapeshifter saw her sitting on a wrought tan chair that seemed to be made of razor-wrought tan bones. In addition to the 2 bodyguards of Nikaro's, there were many tieflings standing beside her. This is the place where we show our products to our guests. It's a little shabby, but please don't mind. After saying that, the underworld queen clapped her hands. A few attendants standing beside him immediately bent down and grabbed a chain on the ground, pulling it up with force. The sound of 2 pieces of leather rubbing against each other echoed in the round ear room, making the shapeshifter feel particularly uneasy. You want 2 thugs, but I think 1 is enough, and we can save some money. After coming out of the Baylor's gray nail, the shape-shifting monster was full of confidence. Most of this confidence came from the thug following behind him. With a guy as tall as a storm giant as his hired thug, he naturally appeared to be very persuasive. Since Shimashaka had seen through his disguise, the queen of the underworld had arranged a suitable fighter for him. It was a battle-type monster with a terrifying appearance. At the same time, it was also very powerful. It was convenient for the shape-shifting monster to communicate with it. This kind of monster was called Gyuj. Some busybodies liked to add giant to its scientific name as a decoration. On the head of this giant monster, there was a terrifying vertical crack. Both of his arms were split from the elbows, forming 2 claws. The soles of his feet had a structure similar to that of an ostrich's toes, and his calves were covered with a layer of black hair. The deformed Gyuj appeared deep underground. No one knew whether they were exiled because they angered the gods, or were driven to the Underdark by a race under the sun. They might even be creatures that crawled out from the dark world, even deeper underground. But in any case, the bloody and barbaric ritual of the Gyuj was enough to make any normal above-ground resident hate them to the core. Although their bodies were heavy, the Gyuj's movements were unusually nimble, as if they didn't have many joints in their bodies. This kind of physique allowed the Gyuj to extend its giant claws to astonishing lengths and squeeze its body into unbelievably narrow passages. The Gyuj would often stick to the blind spots of underground caves, patiently waiting for its prey to enter its attack range before launching a vicious sneak attack. At the same time, their personalities were extremely stubborn, relying on their keen senses. As long as they successfully injured their prey, a Gugu would be able to rely on his sense of smell for blood to pursue the prey for 10 days to half a month. The Gyuj temporarily hired by the shape-shifting monster was called Kadith. He was a slave bought by Shimashaka, and he was more talented than the average Gyuj. Just like the creatures of the underworld, Kadith could use some spells. His magic skills, combined with his powerful body, made him a very difficult monster to deal with. So when the shape-shifting monster brought him into the market, most of the customers and street vendors who lingered around the place would quickly hide when they saw the two figures, afraid of offending them. The shape-shifting monster was very satisfied with this. For the first time in the past 2 days, he felt that his money was well spent. Do you see the tall building? What you need to do is to become invisible, then rush in and smash the first floor. Remember, immediately escape on your own after doing this. Look, there's a manhole at the corner of the street that leads directly to the sewers. That's your escape route. In order to scare the half-goat and vent his anger, the shape-shifting monster brought Kadith to destroy Pooh's business. As for the fact that this was the patrol route of the Order Brotherhood and the diehards, he had already thought of an excuse to deal with them. When the time comes, I'll say that I'm just a friendly passerby. The reason why I brought Gyuj here is to guide the way for the giant brothers who drank the potion sold by the Thousand Herb Hall. As long as Gyuj can escape in time after destroying the shop, even if the Order Brotherhood and the diehards ask about me, they still can't do anything to me. P.S. Words below are not counted. Created a discussion group for Scales of Eternity, 6183822262. Everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. Currently, I have my own manga outline, part of it, Easter egg introduction, related historical knowledge, and the author's daily life in the group. Readers who want to see more behind-the-scenes tidbits, please join in. Chapter 609. With his employer's permission, Gyuj immediately activated his spell-like ability and concealed himself. Only his clawed feet left a series of strange footprints on the ground. Phantom Strike. Rushing to the entrance of 10,000 Herb Hall, Guga fiercely swung the cane in his hand, wanting to break through the door with a great momentum. But in the end, he did not succeed. His weapon did not even shake the door at all. Although the door looked like an ordinary glass product, it was as hard as diamond. Like a specialty of a big country, the glass produced by the scale of Perpetual Order had excellent explosion-proof properties. Naturally, the building materials prepared for the Thousand Herb Hall were the best of the best. Therefore, even with Gyuj's strength, he only made himself dizzy when he smashed the glass. His two claws holding the cane were now a little numb and sore. What surprised him was that the door, which did not suffer any damage from the blow just now, suddenly opened by itself. A hand reached out from inside. With a gentle grasp, Gyuj could not move at all, as if he was clamped by the air. Looks like he's just a hired thug. He stepped on Gyuj's chest with his feet. Using the technique he learned from the Nine-Sword Catalog, he made the giant-like monster unable to exert any strength. He seems to have a slave collar on his neck. Hearing Kiza's words, Pu Wu came over with a bottle of paralysis potion in his hand. This seems to be the slave emblem of the plunder of Shimashaka. After the half-goat finished speaking, he poured the paralysis potion into Gyuj's vertical mouth. Gyuj was actually immune to toxins and diseases, so the paralysis potion could not paralyze them. However, after working with the ogre shaman for a while, Pu Wu learned another way of concocting potions, and his ability had been upgraded. Similar to the Per potion that could promote the evolution of the Tana Reet demons, the paralysis potion he concocted no longer relied on toxins to paralyze the nerves. Instead, it induced the body to produce a false signal of "I need sleep to recover the body." Because there were no toxins in the potion, only some supplements. Even though Gyuj was immune to toxins, that ability was not triggered at all. He only lasted for a short while before he followed his biological instincts and fell into a deep sleep. After doing all this, Pu Wu put on a pair of gloves made of shark lizard skin. He picked up the collar on Guji's neck and looked at it carefully. There is a pattern in the shape of a razor vine head ornament on it. It is indeed the emblem that the female fox often uses, but after a moment of silence, the half-goat asked his question, "Why did the hired thug who came to smash the shop?" The shapeshifter stayed across the street, so I guess that he hired the thug from Shimashaka. The situation at the broken temple is probably escalated. He needed to buy the insecticide, but he didn't want to be cheated like last time. That's why he hired thugs from the Queen of the Underworld to intimidate you and force you to sell your products to him at a low price. Keys's explanation enlightened the half-goat. That guy is a complete idiot who thinks he's strong. He actually bought services from the raiders. And with the female fox's habit, she always eats after the previous one. That's why the thug she sent kept the collar that could reveal his identity. If we don't recognize him, then she'll think we're idiots too. She'll probably have her eyes on Thousand Herb Hall. If we recognize him, whether we ask her for compensation or throw him to the patrols of the Brotherhood of Order, we'll definitely come into contact with him in the end. Maybe there's a third possibility. Glancing at Gyuj on the ground, he took out the small hammer called Hammer. Following his will, the dragon-head hammer immediately turned into a sharp longsword. With a poochie sound, the longsword stabbed into Gyuj's heart. Dark blue blood spurted out from the monster's chest. Gyuj, who had just fallen silent, suddenly woke up. However, before he could get up, Keys swung his sword and beheaded the ugly guy. The slave collar around his neck was completely soaked in the monster's blood. It immediately transformed into a steel cobra and began to greedily suck the dark blue blood. Not long after, Gyuj's body shriveled and turned into a pile of tattered leather. After drinking the blood, the steel cobra became more agile. The construct pet with fake life coiled up and stared at Keys, who killed Gyuj. It hissed and spat out its forked tongue. It looked like it was threatening Shiyin, but it also looked like it had something to say. Shimishaka, shaking off the blood on his blade and putting away the dragon-headed warhammer that had transformed back into its original form, Quest stood with his hands behind his back and pretended to be arrogant as he spoke to the construct familiar. Or perhaps the queen of the underworld of the Sigil City. Why are you making things difficult for small businesses like us? A bell-like laughter suddenly came from the steel cobra's mouth. It was now in a state of communication with its master. It's just as I guessed. Behind the little half-goat apprentice in the Thousand Herb Cup shop, there really is such a big shot like you. Your skills are really not bad, but this is Imprint City, a place filled with talented people. It's fine to offend a weak woman like me who has no one to rely on, but it's definitely not a wise move to offend a big shot like the Gods Association. Keys still replied without any emotion. I don't understand what you're talking about. Our shop has just opened, and the goods we sell are limited to the commonly used potions. There are no dangerous goods and no contraband. I don't know why we've angered the powerful association you mentioned. Don't be in a hurry to deny it. Shimishaka was very intelligent, so she did not hesitate to interrupt Keys's words. I've received news that President Terrence of the Gods Association has returned to Sigil City. A big shot like him. Even the Gate City would tremble with a stomp of his feet. The shape-shifting monster is just a test. If the monster can't get what he wants, then he'll probably find the liquidators, the anti-Templar assassins, or himself. Can I take this as a threat? Keys coldly interrupted Shimishaka. He did not want to spoil someone who liked to interrupt others. Or do you have something that you want to kindly remind me of? Just say it. I'm prepared. Chapter 610. Sitting in the office of the Wheel of Fortune, a tiefling servant stood beside her and held up a dressing mirror with both hands. Shishaka sipped a wine called Red Claw, while using the mirror in front of her to connect with her familiar senses and communicate with Keys in the distance. As a successful person, the underworld queen of Sigil City had strong personal habits, so much so that some people suspected that this female judgment fiend had even deviated from the neutral camp and slid to the side of a life form that abided by order. Otherwise, it would be difficult to explain why she always liked to deal with specific jobs at specific times and places. She rarely did as she pleased like others of her kind. Shishaka's attitude towards these rumors had always been one of contempt. Those people had never truly understood what it meant to do as you please. She just liked to do the right job at the right time and place. When selling contraband, she liked to stay in the baler's grain nails in the lair. When negotiating with others, staying in the Wheel of Fortune was the most comfortable choice. This was not just pure hedonism. Sensory comfort did help to maintain a normal heart, especially when meeting difficult negotiating targets. The luxurious facilities in the Wheel of Fortune would allow her to consider the possible loss report before she was ready to act up. Thus, she could continue to remain calm. To be honest, Shashaka was actually a little annoyed that she was rejected by Keys of the Thousand Herb Hall. She really wanted to pluck a razor vine from her headdress and lash it at anything to vent her emotions. However, this was the office she liked after all, so she resisted the urge to be violent. It seems that you have guessed it. I'm willing to provide you with some protection to prevent your business from being targeted by the gods and not the Church of Gods. However, I'll charge a small fee. After all, it's not a small expense to feed people and horses. The Underworld Queen looked at the dressing mirror and said slowly, "Of course, you can choose to refuse, but that's not a wise move. If you're interested in my proposal, you can come to the Wheel of Fortune Casino in the women's area. I have my own office here." Hearing Shimashaka's invitation, a smile appeared on Quest's face. "Do I look like the kind of idiot who likes to shout at people? I'm a decent guy. However, since this is an invitation from the Underworld Queen of Sigil City, if I'm not mistaken about what you said, I will still go and talk to you, but not now, because I still have business to discuss." While Shimashaka was still wondering if she should continue probing, Keys decisively raised his leg and stomped on the Queen of the Underworld's construct, crushing it into pieces. He unilaterally ended the conversation caused by him, not caring that his actions might anger the female judgment fiend who was famous in Sigil City. Keys already had some experience in dealing with Judgment Demon. He would not follow the thoughts of those cunning foxes. However, if he knew that Shimashaka was actually the cousin of Maikoe, who had been killed by him, he would have definitely rushed to the Wheel of Fortune immediately. This was because the big gift pack was really worth remembering. I'll deal with that female fox later. Keys walked to the door of Thousand Herb Hall. Due to Guji's attack, the place was still sealed. We have to open the door and do business first. That shape-shifting monster is a long-term customer of Thousand Herb Hall. Let me clean it up first. While Keys was fiddling with the restriction on the door, Pu Wu quickly cleaned up the hall. The dead Guji skin bag was put away and put into a special incubator for planting special plants that needed to be nourished by the flesh and blood of the monsters. The fragments of the steel cobra were thrown into the combustion chamber of the boiler upstairs and completely turned into a pool of molten iron. After doing this, Pu Wu washed his hands. Then, he checked the hall on the first floor again. After confirming that it was spotless, he let Keys open the explosion-proof glass door. Pu Wu walked out, clasped his hands, and shouted at the shape-shifting monster who was hesitating on the other side of the street. "Mr. God, not a key member of the Gods Association, we are open for business. If you want to buy the right medicine, come quickly." Following his shout, the customers and peddlers on the streets of the big market, as well as the informants walking the streets and alleys, all turned their attention to the shape-shifting monster. Words such as God, not a Gods Association, and medicine had attracted everyone's interest. Damn bastard. The shape-shifting monster kept cursing in his heart. Even if he wanted to turn around and leave, he was afraid that he would have nowhere to hide under the gaze of so many pairs of eyes. What's that Guga doing? Why isn't there any movement from inside? After thinking for a few seconds, the shape-shifting monster understood that if he stuck his head out, he would be stabbed no matter what. He could only rub his face, which was distorted by the sudden impact of complex emotions, and stepped toward the door of Thousand Herb Hall. After he stepped on the spotless marble floor of the shop, the glass door behind him slammed shut, isolating the noise of the market area outside. The shape-shifting monster suddenly realized that there was one more person here than when he first came. It was originally a very simple matter. Keys leaned on the counter and said to the only customer in front of him, "We sell all kinds of medicine products. You're responsible for buying and using them." But now, he kicked the incubator that had just been cleaned up by Pu Wu. Guji's dark blue blood stains could still be vaguely seen inside. "Everything has become complicated, and it's all your fault." As if he was stating a fact, the young blue dragon pointed out what the shape-shifting monster had done before. Moreover, because Goo Goo was invisible when he broke into Thousand Herb Hall, most of the people on the street did not witness it. Now, even if the shape-shifting monster rushed out to report to the patrol team, they could directly say that Goo Gee's body was actually a tool that he had bought to cultivate medicine, coupled with his identity as the backbone of the association. Even if he found the Order Brotherhood and the Diehards, who seemed to want to maintain order in Sigil City on the surface, they were actually more willing to add insult to injury. It was a good opportunity to use the capture of the shape-shifting monster to deal with the gods and non-gods that were in trouble. Needless to say, if such a thing happened, President Barnes, who was already in a bad mood, would probably explode in a thunderous rage. As the initiator of all this, even if the shape-shifting monster wanted to die, it would become a luxury. Therefore, this unlucky guy was like a qualified leak in the end. He obediently followed Keys's advice and spent 2,000 platinum coins, which was about half of his wealth, to buy medicine that could deal with the insect plague. Chapter 611. This was the strategy of the shape-shifting monster. When threatened, everyone would try their best to avoid the worst outcome. As long as one was rational, one would choose an acceptable outcome. Therefore, after paying half of his wealth, which included the contracts of many properties, the deity who was not the backbone of the Gods Association once again returned to the broken temple with the box. What he was most concerned about now was not how to take revenge on Keys and Poo Woo, but whether the insect repellent he brought back could solve the situation of the headquarters being besieged by the insects. Only by doing this well, even if it was only a nominal solution to the problem, would he be able to answer to President Barnes. If there were other problems in the future, it would be a headache for the president himself. In fact, the shape-shifting monster still had some expectations. After all, if there were other problems with the medicine of the Thousand Herb Hall, perhaps Tynes would personally take action and avenge him for the loss of his wallet. Sir President, after returning to the Broken Temple, the shape-shifting monster did not directly give the medicine to the guards. Instead, he first came to the conference hall. He also deliberately tidied up his makeup to make himself look a little embarrassed. Placing the silk box containing the insect repellent in front of Barnes, the shape-shifting monster said flatteringly, "This is the insect repellent I spent a lot of money to buy from the pharmacy store. It's called Six Gods Source Solution." Perhaps because he heard something related to gods, Tynes' eyes suddenly turned sharp. Why is it called Six Gods? Is it related to those false gods or the foolish god slaves who are synthesizing the potion? No, sir. The shape-shifting monster had long known that he would be questioned like this. He had also obtained a reasonable explanation from Keys. In fact, according to the pharmacist who made this medicine, the formula of this medicine came from a dimension where there was no false god belief. The witch doctors in that dimension called the operating rules of the various organs of creatures God. This is somewhat in line with the philosophy of our association. The Six Gods Source Solution was originally a kind of botanical fragrance used to adjust the functions of the organs. However, during the process of using it, the witch doctors discovered that if alcohol was added to dilute it, a powerful insect repellent could be formulated. The meaning of the name is not bad. So, how is its effect? After listening to this explanation, Turn's complexion improved a little. He continued to ask, "Have you tried the effects of this potion? Don't be like Sandalwood from before. Not only did you not solve the problem completely, but you also brought a bunch of new trouble." "That's what I'm thinking, Lord Turner." The last time they used sandalwood, it was because the rat infestation was too serious. They had to use emergency measures, so they lit up too much sandalwood at once. However, the rats and bugs are trying their best to wear each other down, so the pressure on the outer perimeter of the temple has decreased a lot. For now, we just need to concentrate our forces and deal with the earth ogres that might retaliate by digging under the broken temple. I have an immature idea, and that is to first dilute a small portion of the Six God Source liquid, and then have the association's blasphemy priests find the traces of the earth monsters and spray them with targeted spray. By observing the reactions of the earth golems, We can know if the potion is effective or not, and if there are any side effects. And with those blasphemous priests holding the fort, even if something goes wrong, we can stop it in time. After listening to his report, Turns and the association's core members discussed again and decided to follow the method of the mutated monster. They really didn't want to use the association's armed forces now. First of all, a large number of troops were fighting for territory in other dimensions. Second of all, they had to go through so much trouble to deal with rats and bugs. It was easy to leave something for others to use against them. So, the mutated monster finally glossed over the previous problem for the time being. In the Wheel of Fortune casino in the women's area of Sigil City, Keys was also looking for cover. Since the Underworld Queen sent him an invitation, out of interest in the information she had, the young blue dragon naturally had to meet her in person. But he didn't want to expose his identity, so it was reasonable to seek the identity of a high-level rogue for himself. The best disguise was to practice it personally. Although Keys was not a rogue, because he had studied various martial arts in the Nine Sword catalog for many years, a mere leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls was not difficult for him. After coming to the women's area, he just asked a little and found the Wheel of Fortune casino. This casino was originally the private residence of a vampire count, and the architectural style was similar to that of an ancient castle. However, the unlucky original owner was set up by Shimikasha. Not only did he lose his property, but he was also carried into the large morgue in the lair. Now, the vampire's castle was transformed into a luxury casino. In a sense, it was still a blood-sucking cave, which matched the name Wheel of Fortune. It was difficult to climb out of it after sinking into it. However, Keys didn't have to think about how to climb out. He who was disguised as a high-level rogue should be thinking about how to climb in. In order not to expose his ability too much, he could only find a corner of the Wheel of Fortune.